What if one branch of the human family simply vanished without warning? Long before civilizations rose, Earth was home to multiple human species, each fighting to survive an unpredictable world. Yet one lineage disappeared so completely that for thousands of years it was as if they had never existed. What happened to them? Did they lose the struggle for survival, or did they leave behind hidden traces that still live within us today? If you enjoy uncovering the greatest mysteries of ancient history, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Now let's journey back to the forgotten chapter of humanity's past and discover the human lineage that disappeared without warning. The cave is quiet now, but the silence is not empty. It holds the weight of a vanished presence, far inside the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia, where cold air slips between limestone walls and the light fades into blue shadow. A few small fragments of bone once rested in the dirt without announcing what they were. Nothing about them looked like the beginning of a new human story. There was no complete skull staring back from the earth, no dramatic skeleton curled beside a hearth, no painted wall revealing a face from the lost past. There was only a sliver of a finger bone later, a few teeth ajaw from a high plateau, traces of sediment and the invisible script of ancient DNA. From such small remains, an entire branch of humanity would begin to appear almost like a figure slowly emerging through fog, then vanishing again before anyone could see it clearly. The mystery is not simply that this lineage disappeared. Extinction is common in deep time. Species come and go, climates turn, forests retreat, seas rise. Animals follow food until they cannot. The stranger thing is how little warning the record gives. For thousands upon thousands of years, these humans exist somewhere across Asia. They leave genetic echoes in people living today. They meet other humans. They survive cold altitude distance, and perhaps landscapes that would make most bodies struggle for breath. Then, without a single battlefield, without a written lament, without a final settlement buried under ash, their separate identity fades from view. The earth keeps only fragments, and even those fragments are so few that scholars still debate the true shape of the people they belong to. Before going deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. The vanished lineage is now known as the Denisovans, named not after a kingdom, a Tool tradition, or a people who called themselves by that name, but after Denisova Cave, the place where modern science first recognized them. The name itself is almost accidental, tied to a site rather than an identity. In life, they would not have known themselves as Denisovans. They would have known the smell of smoke in stone chambers, the ache of winter, the sharp attention required to cross open ground where predators also watched. They would have known kinship hunger memory and the long patience of people who survive in hard country. Yet their world reaches the present mostly through leftovers too small to hold in the imagination without help. A finger bone from a child becomes a doorway. A molar heavy and strange becomes a clue. A piece of jaw found far from Siberia high on the Tibetan plateau becomes a sign that this lineage was not confined to one cave in the mountains. Sediments from cave floors carry genetic traces even where no visible bone remains. Modern genomes carry inherited pieces of them scattered across living populations in Asia and Oceania. What survives in the record suggests a human group far more widespread, adaptable, and significant than the early fossils alone could prove. Yet every answer opens another absence. If they range so widely, where are their camps? If they endured so long, why are their bones so rare? If they mixed with the ancestors of living people, when did they stop being a separate population? And if disappearance can happen by blending, fading, shrinking, or being overwhelmed, What does it mean to say that a human lineage vanished? To understand the force of that question, the older picture of human history has to be set aside. For a long time, the story was often told as though humanity moved along a single road, one species replacing another, in a neat ascent toward the present. The deeper past seemed like a ladder. Ancient apes, early humans, stronger toolmakers, larger brains, then finally Homo sapiens walking alone into history. That image is too simple. The real human past is more like a braided river, with channels splitting, crossing, drying and rejoining. At times, several kinds of humans share the planet. Some live close enough to meet. Some are separated by deserts, ice mountains, or forests. Some leave bones, some leave tools, some leave only DNA, the faintest signature of a life that once had heat breath and movement. The Denisovans belong to this braided world. They are not monsters from legend, not missing links in an old-fashioned chain, and not a failed version of modern humans. They are part of the human family, close enough to interbreed with Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, yet distinct enough for their DNA to reveal a separate history. Their existence changes the emotional texture of prehistory. It means that the world our ancestors moved through was not empty of other human minds. Somewhere beyond the campfire's reach, there may have been others who looked familiar and unfamiliar at once, whose bodies carried different inheritances, whose tools and habits may have overlapped with ours, while also holding traditions now lost completely. The first shock of the Denisovan discovery is its smallness. A whole people comes into scientific view from a fragment that might have been overlooked in another age. The bone belonged to a young girl, perhaps a child, who lived tens of thousands of years ago. The exact details of her life remain unreachable. The evidence does not preserve her name, her face, or the sound of the language around her, if language in the modern sense shaped her daily world. But a sample from that bone preserved DNA well enough to show that she was neither Neanderthal nor Homo sapiens. She belonged to something else, a sister lineage whose presence had been hiding in plain sight inside a cave already known for ancient occupation. There is a quiet irony in that. Archaeology often depends on the visible stone tools, cut marks, hearths, bones, ornaments, walls, burials. But the Denisovans were first recognized through the invisible. Their history had to be read chemically in sequences of genetic material extracted from ancient remains. The body had almost vanished while the code remained. This is one of the lesser-known surprises of the story. One of the most important human lineages ever identified was not first defined by a skull or a skeleton, but by molecular evidence from a tiny bone. In an older century, that fragment might have been catalogued and forgotten, or perhaps never understood at all. Denisova Cave itself seems almost designed for memory, though memory there is uneven and selective. It sits in a region where mountains, forests, and open landscapes meet a place that could draw animals and humans again and again across immense stretches of time. Layers of sediment accumulated like pages in a damaged book. Neanderthals used the cave. Modern humans may have passed through or lived nearby. Denisovans were there too. The site does not offer a clean household belonging to one group alone. Instead, it preserves overlap, return, and complexity. That complexity is part of the mystery. The cave is not a tomb for one vanished people. It is a crossroads where different human lineages leave traces close enough to make separation difficult, and yet the child's bone points outward beyond the cave. The Denisovans cannot be reduced to one Siberian shelter. Their genetic legacy appears strongest today in populations far to the southeast, especially in parts of Oceania, including indigenous peoples of New Guinea, and nearby regions with additional signals across parts of Asia. This suggests contact somewhere along the long routes taken by modern human ancestors as they move through Asia. The evidence remains incomplete, but it implies that Denisovan populations or closely related groups occupied a vast and varied world. They may have lived in cold northern zones, high mountain environments, temperate forests, and perhaps subtropical regions far from the Altai. A lineage known from a cave in Siberia may have once stretched in some form across much of eastern Eurasia. That wide shadow makes their disappearance harder, not easier to explain. A small isolated group can vanish through bad luck, disease, famine, or one sharp change in climate. A widespread lineage is different. If Denisovans occupied many environments, then their fading likely did not come from one simple event. No single explanation fully accounts for this. Climate instability may have broken habitats apart. Modern human expansion may have changed the balance of competition and contact. Small Denisovan populations may have been absorbed through interbreeding until their separate identity dissolved. Some groups may have disappeared earlier, others later. The vanishing may not have been a sudden end at all, but a long uneven retreat that only looks abrupt because the surviving record is so poor. Still, the feeling of suddenness remains. It comes from the gap between the scale of the lineage and the thinness of what remains. Here is a human group important enough to leave genes in living people, old enough to stand beside Neanderthals and Homo sapiens in the late human family tree, adaptable enough to touch some of the harshest landscapes in Asia. And yet the visible archive of their existence can feel almost impossibly sparse. A few bones, a few teeth, a jaw, sediment, genomes. In that imbalance, the imagination senses a disappearance without warning, not necessarily because the end was instant, but because the evidence goes quiet before the story feels complete. The first layer of the mystery, then, is not a final death scene. It is the realization that the human past contains vanished presences that modern people only recently learned how to detect. The Denisovans were not waiting in myth. They were not remembered in ancient chronicles. They had no monuments, no inscriptions, no city ruins, no king lists, no collapse horizon burned into clay. They belonged to a deeper world where survival left fewer signatures and identity did not harden into written names. Their disappearance is therefore almost anti-dramatic, which makes it more haunting. They did not vanish from history because history had not yet begun. They vanished from the living landscape, from the count of separate human forms walking under the same sky, and only much later did science notice the empty space they left behind. The cave remains quiet. The mountains keep their cold distances. The child's finger bone no longer lies unnoticed in the soil, but it still refuses to give up everything. It says that another kind of human was here. It says that the family tree was wider than once imagined. It says that extinction in human terms may not always mean a clean ending. Sometimes a lineage disappears from sight while pieces of it travel onward in the blood of strangers. Sometimes the last trace of the people is not a ruin on a hill, but a gene that helps someone breathe thin air, resist disease, or carry an ancient inheritance without knowing its name. And somewhere between the bone, the cave, and the living genome, the vanished human lineage begins to speak not loudly, but enough to draw the story deeper into the world of many humans that once shared the earth. The world that surrounds the Denisovans is not the empty stage that older versions of prehistory once imagined. It is crowded, shifting, and alive with human difference. Across the late Pleistocene, the earth holds not one kind of human being, but several, each shaped by long migrations, isolation, adaptation, and chance. They do not stand in a neat line, one waiting to replace the other like figures in a museum display. They overlap in time. They move through neighbouring regions. They inherit old landscapes and discover new ones. In some places they may never meet. In others they come close enough for their descendants to carry mixed ancestry tens of thousands of years later. The human story at this depth is not a ladder. It is a wide, restless field of cousins, some familiar, some still only half seen. To picture that world, the modern map has to soften. Borders disappear, cities vanish, rivers move across floodplains without bridges. Coastlines lie in different places because sea levels rise and fall with the great cold cycles of the Ice Age. Glaciers lock water into frozen masses, exposing land that is now drowned beneath shallow seas. Forests advance, shrink, and return. Grasslands open like corridors, then close as climates shift again. Deserts breathe outward during dry phases and retreat when rains come back. Herds follow vegetation. Predators follow herds. Humans follow both, but not always in the same way. Each lineage carries its own inherited body, its own learned habits, its own tolerance for cold heat, altitude, scarcity, and distance. In Western Eurasia, Neanderthals endure through repeated climatic swings. They are not the crude caricatures that once haunted popular imagination. Their bodies are powerful, compact, and well suited to cold environments. Their brains are large. They make tools, use fire, hunt dangerous animals at close range, care for injured companions, and leave evidence of behaviors that scholars still debate with care. Their world stretches from parts of Western Europe, across the Near East, and into Western Asia. They live through glacial episodes that would break a less adaptable creature, and for a very long time they are not marginal at all. They are one of the main human presences on the continent. Farther east, the picture grows less complete and more intriguing. Fossils from Asia do not always fit easily into old categories. Some may belong to early Homo sapiens, some to archaic populations, some perhaps to Denisovans or Denisovan-related groups, and some remain difficult to classify. The evidence remains incomplete not because nothing happened there, but because preservation, discovery, and excavation have been uneven. Tropical soils destroy bone quickly. Mountain caves may protect fragments, but reveal only narrow windows. Many ancient coastlines where people may have lived and moved now lie underwater. What survives is only a fraction of what once existed, and that fraction is shaped by geology as much as by history. At the same time, Homo sapiens are emerging and expanding from Africa in waves and movements that are still being refined by new evidence. They do not simply appear one day as fully modern conquerors sweeping across the globe in a single unstoppable line. Their own story is complex with earlier dispersals, local failures, later expansions, and long periods of contact with other humans. Anatomically, modern humans evolve in Africa, but Africa itself is not one uniform place. It contains varied populations spread across forests, savannas, coasts, wetlands, and highlands. The roots of Homo sapiens are deep and branching too. By the time some groups move into Eurasia in lasting numbers, they carry with them not destiny but possibilities. This is one of the most important shifts in understanding the vanished lineages. Modern humans are not entering a vacant world. They are entering a human world. In the Near East they encounter Neanderthals. Somewhere in Asia they encounter Denisovans or groups closely related to them. Farther south and east, other human forms may survive in island or forest refuges. Homo floresiensis, small-bodied and astonishingly distinct lives on Flores, long after many earlier human relatives have vanished elsewhere. Homo luzonensis appears in the Philippines, known from fragmentary remains that suggest another unusual island population. The exact relationships among all these groups remain debated, but their existence makes one thing clear. The late human family is wider than the single surviving branch suggests. The Denisovans occupy the most ghostly position in this gathering. Neanderthals have skulls, skeletons, tool sites, and a long history of research. Homo floresiensis has bones that, though debated, give the imagination a body to hold. Denisovans, by contrast, are first known almost backwards. Their genome reveals them before their anatomy can be properly seen. They are present as a genetic signal, a pattern of difference, a population inferred from the molecular remains of a few individuals. For a lineage of humans, this is an extraordinary kind of entrance. It is like identifying a lost kingdom from the fingerprints left on a few scattered objects long before finding its roads or houses, yet the genetic evidence places them firmly among the close relatives of Neanderthals. Denisovans and Neanderthals share a common ancestry after their line splits from the lineage leading to Homo sapiens. Over immense stretches of time, their populations separate and evolve in different regions. Neanderthals become the best-known archaic humans of Western Eurasia. Denisovans, it seems, become an Eastern counterpart, though that phrase may be too simple. Their range may have been enormous, and they may have included deeply diverged groups spread across different habitats. Some genetic studies suggest that the Denisovan ancestry in living people may come from more than one Denisovan-related population, hinting at diversity within the lineage itself. Scholars still debate the full meaning of these signals, but they suggest that Denisovans were not a tiny oddity confined to one mountain cave. This matters because disappearance looks different when a lineage is diverse. A single village can vanish. A scattered network of populations can fade in many ways at once. Some groups may shrink under climate stress. Others may be absorbed by incoming Homo sapiens. Others may persist in remote areas longer than the fossil record can currently show. In one valley, the ending may come through hunger, in another through interbreeding, in a third through the slow loss of territory, as resources shift and neighbouring groups grow. No single explanation fully accounts for this because the Denisovans were probably not one uniform people living in one uniform landscape. Their world is also a world of changing contact. Human lineages are not sealed containers. They meet separate and meet again. The idea that different human species must either destroy each other or remain completely apart is too rigid for the evidence. Ancient DNA shows that interbreeding occurred. The ancestors of many people today carry Neanderthal DNA. Some populations carry Denisovan ancestry. Even Denisova Cave itself preserves evidence of remarkable closeness between lineages, including an individual whose mother was Neanderthal and whose father was Denisovan. That single person known through a bone fragment quietly overturns any simple picture of absolute separation. Different human groups could be distinct and yet still close enough to have children together. In such a world, identity is not always clear from the ground beneath a campfire. A stone tool may not reveal who held it. A hearth may not say whether the hands around it belong to Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo sapiens, or some mixed community. This is a lesser-known difficulty that shapes the entire mystery. Archaeologists often find objects without the bones of the makers. Geneticists may identify ancestry without knowing the daily culture attached to it. The material and biological records do not always line up neatly. A tool tradition may spread between groups. A population may adopt a method from neighbours. A cave layer may contain traces from different occupations separated by centuries or millennia. The deeper the record goes, the more humility it demands. The planet itself adds to the confusion. During the Pleistocene climate, instability is not background scenery. It is one of the great engines of human life. Cold phases lower sea levels and open land bridges. Warmer phases drown routes and reshape coasts. In northern Eurasia, steppe and tundra expand and contract. In East and Southeast Asia, monsoons shift, forests fragment, and island chains change their relationships to the mainland. The same region can become hospitable marginal and hospitable again over a span shorter than the life of a lineage. Humans living through these changes do not experience them as graphs or cycles. They experience them as altered migrations of animals, failed seasons deeper. Snow-different plants flooded crossings and the need to move or endure. This is the stage on which the Denisovan disappearance will eventually unfold, but it is not yet an ending. For now it is a world of many humans, and that fact changes everything. Homo sapiens are not the inevitable owners of the earth. Neanderthals are not waiting passively to vanish. Denisovans are not a footnote, though they will become one in the visible record for a long time. Each lineage has survived long enough to prove its own success. Each carries knowledge suited to places modern people may never fully reconstruct. Each moves through landscapes that are now buried, drowned, eroded, or transformed beyond recognition. The tragedy, if it can be called that, is that only one kind of human remains visibly present today. This makes the past look cleaner than it was. The absence of living Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other relatives creates the illusion that their disappearance was natural, expected, almost simple. But the evidence suggests something stranger and more intimate. For much of deep time, humanity is plural. The Earth holds several answers to the question of what a human can be. Some are broad-shouldered hunters of cold lands. Some are island survivors shaped by isolation. Some are ghost lineages known mostly through inherited DNA. Some may still be waiting in unstudied fossils or unsequenced sediments. Then, over time, the chorus thins. The Denisovans stand inside that thinning chorus, still obscure, still powerful in implication. Their story begins not with collapse, but with coexistence. Before they disappear, they belong to a crowded human world in which boundaries are real, but porous difference is deep but not absolute, and survival depends on more than the intelligence alone. The small bone in Denisova Cave is therefore not only the sign of one lost lineage, it is a reminder that modern humanity emerged from a world full of other human possibilities, most of which no longer walk anywhere except inside fragments, sediments, and genes. The mystery of the vanished lineage begins there in the realization that the lonely human present was preceded by a much stranger and more populated past. The first clear sign of the shadow lineage does not arrive as a grand fossil discovery. It arrives almost too quietly in a small piece of a child's finger bone found among the sediments of Denisova Cave. The fragment is easy to underestimate. It does not look like the kind of object that should rearrange the human family tree. It has no face, no brow ridge, no jawline, no posture, no obvious drama. It is a piece of a body that once belonged to a living child in a cold mountain region, and for a long time that is nearly all that can be said with the eye alone. Yet inside it, protected across tens of thousands of years, remains a trace more revealing than shape. The DNA preserved in that fragment carries a history no researcher could have read from the bone's appearance. When scientists analyze that ancient DNA, the result is startling. The child is not a Neanderthal, although Neanderthals are already known from the broader region and from deeper layers of human history. The child is not a member of Homo sapiens either. Her genetic inheritance branches away from both close to Neanderthals, but distinct enough to show that another human population has been present unrecognized until that moment. This is the beginning of the Denisovan story, as modern science knows it, not a skull rising from a pit, but a genome appearing from a fragment. One small bone reveals that the late Ice Age world contains a human lineage no one had clearly identified before. That discovery changes the rules of recognition. For most of archaeological history, extinct humans are found through anatomy. A skull is compared with another skull. Teeth are measured, limbs are examined. The curve of a brow, the shape of a pelvis, the thickness of bone, the structure of a jaw become evidence. This is still essential, but the Denisovans show that anatomy is not the only doorway. In their case, genetics opens the door first. A lineage can be real before its face is known. A population can have mixed, moved, lived and disappeared while leaving behind almost no visible body. The evidence remains incomplete, but the implication is enormous. There may have been other human groups whose fossils have already been found but not recognized, or whose remains have not survived in a form that traditional methods can easily identify. The cave that gives them their name had already been important before the genetic surprise. Denisova Cave lies in the Altai Mountains, a region where ecological zones meet and where ancient humans returned again and again. Its chambers hold layers from different periods accumulated slowly through occupation, abandonment, erosion, animal movement and time. Stone tools appear, animal bones appear, traces of hearths and habitation appear. The cave is not a single frozen moment. It is a long archive of repeated presence. Neanderthals use it. Denisovans use it. Later human groups may be connected to its deposits as well. This makes the site both rich and difficult. It preserves contact and succession, but it also blurs clean boundaries. One of the most remarkable later finds from the cave deepens that complexity. A bone fragment belonging to a young individual with a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. This person, sometimes discussed as a first-generation hybrid, is not a symbol of vague contact somewhere far away. This is direct evidence of intimate contact between two distinct human lineages. It shows that Neanderthals and Denisovans did not merely exist on opposite sides of a map. At least sometimes they met closely enough to form families. The discovery is surprising not because interbreeding had been impossible in theory, but because the fossil record is usually too sparse to catch such an individual so clearly. It is as though deep time briefly allows one private connection to remain visible. The Denisovan child's finger bone, the hybrid fragment, and the large teeth from the same general site begin to sketch a population that remains stubbornly hard to picture. The teeth are especially intriguing. Some Denisovan molars are unusually large and do not fit neatly with expectations based on Neanderthal or modern human dental patterns. Teeth often preserve well, and they can carry important clues about diet development and ancestry. Yet teeth alone are not a portrait. They do not reveal skin, hair, body proportions, clothing gesture or expression. They suggest that Denisovans had distinctive anatomical traits, but scholars still debate exactly how broad those traits were and how they varied across the population. For years, Denisovans are known mostly from this narrow Siberian window, and that creates a problem. Their DNA in living people points far beyond Siberia. If the strongest Denisovan ancestry today appears in populations from Oceania and parts of Southeast Asia, then the actual Denisovan world must have extended directly or indirectly far to the south and east. The cave in the Altai is only one point on a much larger map. It is the place where the lineage is recognized, not necessarily the center of Denisovan life. This is a common trap in archaeology. The place of discovery can feel like the place of origin, even when it is only the place where conditions happen to preserve the evidence. Then another clue appears far from Denisova Cave on the Tibetan plateau. A jawbone from Baishia Karst Cave found at high altitude is identified through protein evidence and later associated genetic work as belonging to a Denisovan or Denisovan-related individual. The jaw is important because it gives the lineage more physical presence. It also suggests that Denisovans or closely related populations lived in environments where thin air challenges the body every day. The Tibetan plateau is not an easy landscape. Cold altitude, seasonal scarcity and isolation make survival demanding. Yet evidence from this region ties Denisovans to high-altitude adaptation, and modern Tibetan populations carry a version of the EPAS1 gene that helps with life in low-oxygen conditions inherited from Denisovan ancestry. What survives in the record suggests that this vanished lineage contributed not only to ancient contact, but to living human survival in extreme environments. That detail is one of the most quietly astonishing parts of the story. A lineage known from fragments may have passed along genetic variation that still helps people breathe on the roof of the world. Disappearance, then, is not absence in any simple sense. The bodies vanish, the culture vanishes, the names vanish, but a biological solution remains. It is carried unknowingly for thousands of years long after the separate population that gave it to modern humans has faded from view. No monument could be more intimate than that. Ancient DNA also begins to emerge from cave sediments, not just bones. This is another lesser-known revolution. Soil from ancient layers can contain traces of genetic material shed by humans and animals who occupied a place. A cave floor may remember people even when their bones are gone. At Denisova, cave and other sites, sediment DNA allows researchers to detect human presence across layers where visible fossils are absent. The idea is almost poetic, though. The science is careful and technical footsteps skin cells waste ash, and occupation leave molecular traces in the earth. The cave becomes not just a container of artifacts but a biological archive. Still, the shadow lineage remains shadowed. There is no full Denisovan skeleton. There is no certain reconstruction of their face that can be offered without caution. Popular images sometimes fill the gap, but many details remain inferred. Their relationship to certain Chinese fossils, their possible presence in Southeast Asia, and the number of Denisovan-related populations are still debated. Some ancient human remains in East Asia show combinations of features that invite comparison, but assigning them confidently is difficult without DNA or proteins. The evidence remains incomplete, and the incompleteness matters. It keeps the Denisovans from becoming too simple too quickly. What can be said is already powerful enough. A child in Siberia, an individual of mixed Neanderthal and Denisovan ancestry, large teeth, a high-altitude jaw, sediment traces and living DNA together reveal a human lineage that was once widespread and deeply connected to the late Ice Age human world. They were close relatives, not distant beasts. They were different humans, not failed humans. They lived long enough to meet other lineages, adapt to demanding places, and leave inheritances that still move through bodies today. The emergence of the Denisovans is therefore unlike the discovery of a lost city or a buried empire. There are no walls to uncover, no royal tomb to open, no inscription waiting for translation. Their first clear identity is molecular, almost invisible, pulled from the smallest remains and compared against the genomes of the living and the dead. They appear in science as a presence defined by relation close to Neanderthals, separate from Homo sapiens, ancestral, in small fragments to many people alive now. The more they come into focus, the more the old human story changes shape around them, and yet the mystery deepens at the same time. A lineage broad enough to leave genes across continents should have left more obvious traces. A people capable of surviving Siberian cold and Tibetan altitude should not feel so faint in the record. Their discovery solves one problem while creating a larger one. It proves that they existed, but it does not yet show how they lived in full, how far they spread, how many groups they contained, or why their separate line came to an end. The shadow lineage has emerged, but only partly, and its very incompleteness becomes the path forward. Beyond the cave, the Denisovan world has to be reconstructed with unusual caution. There is no village plan to unfold, no burial ground filled with bodies, no sequence of painted scenes showing hunters, children, fires, and animals. Their life must be approached through a scattered constellation of clues, stone tools from places they may have occupied, animal remains in the same layers, climate records from caves and lake beds, genetic signals in ancient and living people, and the anatomy of a few hard fragments that survived where most flesh-wood skin fibre and memory vanished. The result is not a complete portrait, but it is not empty either. It suggests a lineage that lives in motion, adapts to different environments, and belongs to a continent-sized story rather than one isolated mountain shelter. At Denisova Cave, the surrounding landscape offers a useful beginning. The Altai is a meeting place of ecological worlds. Forested slopes, river valleys, open steppe highlands, and seasonal cold all press close together. For ancient humans, such places can be valuable because they gather resources from several zones within reach. Animals move through them. Stone raw materials may be found nearby. Shelters offer protection from wind and predators. A cave can become a repeated stop in a wider territory used for short visits, longer occupations, hunting camps, processing sites, or refugee during harsh weather. What survives in the records suggests that Denisova Cave was used by different human groups over a long span, but the cave itself was never the whole world. It was one node in a network of movement. If Denisovans lived there, they knew the rhythms of cold country. Winter would not have been a picturesque season. It would have been a hard test of stored knowledge and bodily endurance. Snow alters the paths of animals. Ice changes the sound and speed of streams. Fuel becomes precious. A fire is not just comfort. It is a tool, a defense, a cooking method, a center of social life and a line between survival and exposure. The people who returned to such places would have needed deep practical attention to weather migration, stone meat, fat hides, and shelter. This does not require romantic exaggeration. It simply follows from living in Ice Age Eurasia, where mistakes could become fatal quickly, and where a group's survival depended on skills passed from one generation to the next. Their tools are harder to assign than their climate. This is one of the central frustrations of Denisovan archaeology. Stone artifacts can be found in layers that overlap with Denisovan presence, but unless they are directly associated with diagnostic bones or genetic traces, it can be difficult to say with certainty who made them. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo sapiens may have used overlapping technologies, or may have exchanged techniques across contact zones. A sharp flake does not carry the maker's name. A scraper does not reveal the shape of the hand that held it. Scholars still debate how much of the material culture in certain layers can be linked confidently to Denisovans. The evidence remains incomplete, and caution is necessary because a tool tradition can travel between groups more easily than a skeleton can. Still, the tools and remains found around Denisovan contexts suggest capable hunters and foragers, not marginal survivors barely clinging to existence. They likely use stone implements to butcher animals, work hides, shape wood or bone, and process plant materials where available. In colder regions, animal bodies would have mattered in many ways. Meat provided calories, but fat was especially valuable. Hides could become coverings, bedding windbreaks or clothing. Sinew could bind. Bone and antler could be used or modified, though organic tools preserve unevenly. The lives behind these objects were probably rich in perishable materials now missing from the archaeological record. Wood, bark, fibre, leather, fur, and plant matter may have formed much of their daily technology, but most of it is gone. This creates a false Stone Age in the record where stone survives and everything softer disappears. The Denisovan body itself remains partly hidden, but genetic and anatomical clues allow careful inference. The close relationship with Neanderthals suggests that they shared some ancient inheritance from a common ancestor. Yet the large molars and the Tibetan jaw indicate that Denisovans were not simply Eastern Neanderthals under another name. They had their own long history. They may have varied widely across their range, especially if Denisovan-related populations were spread through very different environments. A northern group living near the Altai might not have looked exactly like a group adapted to high altitude or one living farther south. Modern people often imagine extinct lineages as uniform types, but real populations vary. Denisovans likely did too. The high-altitude evidence expands the imagination sharply. Baishia Karst Cave on the Tibetan Plateau places Denisovan-related humans in a landscape where every breath contains less oxygen than at lower elevations. The plateau is vast, bright, cold, and exposed with a sky that can seem too large over open ground. For any human population, long-term use of such a place requires more than courage. It requires physiological tolerance, knowledge of seasonal resources and ways of moving across a demanding terrain. The Denisovan connection to the EPAS 1 gene variant in modern Tibetans suggests that these ancient humans carried adaptations useful for life in thin air, later inherited by Homo sapiens. It is possible that Denisovans spent long periods in high-altitude environments before modern humans became deeply established there. No single clue reveals the entire story, but the genetic inheritance makes the plateau one of the most powerful landscapes in the Denisovan mystery. Farther south and east, their world becomes even more difficult to see. Modern genomes indicate that some ancestors of present-day populations in Oceania and parts of Southeast Asia interbred with Denisovan-related groups. This means that somewhere along ancient migration routes through Asia, Homo sapiens encountered these populations. The exact locations remain debated. They may have been on the mainland in island regions or in now drowned landscapes exposed during periods of low sea level. During the Ice Age, sea levels were often much lower than today, creating larger land masses and different coastlines. Sundaland, the exposed region linking parts of Southeast Asia, would have offered forests, rivers, plains, and routes now hidden beneath the sea. Ancient people may have lived, travelled, hunted, and met there, while the evidence of those lives later disappeared under rising waters. This drowned geography matters because it may explain part of the Denisovan invisibility. If key zones of contact lay along ancient coasts or lowland plains now underwater, then the archaeological record available on land is only a surviving edge of a much larger story. Campsites near rivers, shorelines, wetlands, and coastal routes could have been lost as seas rose after the last glacial period. The absence of evidence in such places is not evidence that no one lived there. It may simply mean that the landscape itself has been removed from ordinary excavation. For a lineage already known from fragments drowned worlds, add another layer of silence. Daily Denisovan life would have differed from place to place, but certain human necessities remain steady. Groups need food, shelter tools, care, and social learning. Children must be protected through long dependence. Knowledge has to be transmitted not abstractly, but through watching, doing, correcting, remembering. A young Denisovan learning to strike stone, follow tracks, gather fuel, avoid danger, or read weather would have inherited not only genes but traditions. None of those traditions survive in a way that can be heard. Yet they must have existed because no human lineage survives across harsh environments by instinct alone. Culture, however simple or complex in form, is part of the human survival system. There may also have been symbolic or aesthetic behaviours, though here the ground becomes delicate. Denisova Cave has yielded objects such as ornaments in layers associated with later human activity, and there has been debate over which groups made or used particular items. It is tempting to assign every beautiful artifact to Homo sapiens and every plain tool to archaic humans, but that older habit is increasingly unsatisfying. Neanderthals, for example, show evidence of behaviours once denied to them. Denisovans may have had expressive traditions of their own, but direct evidence remains limited. The safest statement is not that they lacked symbolic life, nor that they possessed it in the same form as later modern humans. The record is too thin. What survives only allows a narrow view through a damaged window. Even so, the people behind the fragments were not shadows to themselves. They were born into landscapes with names or remembered paths, even if those names are gone. They recognized individuals, places, dangers, seasons, perhaps stories. They saw the same mountains, not as scientific coordinates, but as lived surroundings. They knew where stone broke well, where animals crossed, where shelter held warmth, where water could be found, where death had happened before. A lineage can be almost invisible to archaeology, and still have lived with full immediacy in its own time. This is the strange tension at the heart of reconstructing Denisovan life. Science must move carefully, refusing to invent details that the evidence cannot support. Imagination must move carefully too, filling the silence only with what human survival reasonably requires. Between these two forms of caution, a world begins to take shape. It is not a kingdom, not a tribe in the simple storybook sense, not a single culture frozen in place. It is a broad and varied human presence touching caves, mountains, forests, plateaus, and perhaps drowned southern lands. The Denisovans live beyond the cave, and the more their world expands, the more their later disappearance becomes difficult to reduce to one cause, one moment, or one final campfire going cold. From the Altai Mountains, the Denisovan Trail does not run in a straight line. It spreads like a set of half-buried paths across a continent that was never still for long. The people now gathered under the Denisovan name may have moved through valleys, uplands, forests, river corridors, and exposed lands that no longer exist. Their traces appear clearly in only a few places, but their genetic shadow stretches much farther than those places alone can explain. This is where the story leaves the shelter of Denisova Cave and begins to follow landscapes instead of fossils, because the geography of Ice Age Asia may hold some of the missing logic behind a lineage that is everywhere suggested and almost nowhere fully seen. The Altai itself is a good place for such a mystery to begin. It stands near the meeting of what are now Russia, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and China, a region of mountains and open country where ecological boundaries shift with altitude and season. In warmer phases, forests may climb and spread. In colder phases, open steppe expands, carrying grazing animals into wider ranges. Ancient humans living there would have known a terrain of opportunity and danger. A valley could offer shelter and movement. A ridge could expose a group to wind, snow, and watching predators. A cave could preserve warmth and memory, but the food that made life possible would come from outside, from the larger world of animals, plants, stone, fuel, and water. Denisova Cave may have served different human groups for thousands of years because it stood within this kind of useful mosaic. It was not simply a hole in rock. It was a place embedded in roots. Animals passed through the broader region. Raw materials could be gathered. Weather could be endured. The cave's repeated occupation suggests that ancient humans returned because the landscape around it made sense. Yet even there the record is patchy. Layers preserve some moments and lose others. A human group might use a cave briefly and leave almost nothing. Another might return many times and still leave only scraps. What survives in the record suggests presence but not the full rhythm of life. To the south and east, the terrain becomes vast enough to humble every simple theory. If Denisovans or Denisovan-related populations ranged widely across Asia, they may have known some of the most varied environments ever occupied by ancient humans. Northern forests and steppes, high plateaus where the air thins, mountain corridors that open and close with ice and season, river basins that guide animals and people, monsoon lands where rainfall can transform a valley from abundance to hardship, tropical forests where bone decays quickly, and the archaeological record becomes especially quiet. Each environment would shape movement differently, not as a background but as an active force. The Tibetan Plateau is one of the most striking examples. It rises like a stone roof above Asia, cold, bright, and demanding. For a long time, scholars wondered when humans first managed to live or repeatedly travel at such altitude. Low oxygen makes ordinary exertion harder. Cold intensifies the demand for calories. Plants grow in seasonal patterns. Animals move across open spaces that require knowledge and planning to exploit. The Denisovan connection to Bashir Karst Cave suggests that this vanished lineage or a closely related population was present in such high country, long before the plateau became familiar territory for later peoples. The evidence remains incomplete, but the implications are extraordinary. Denisovans were not merely cave dwellers of Siberia. They may have been among the early human masters of altitude. The genetic inheritance linked to high-altitude adaptation deepens that picture. In living Tibetans, a variant associated with the EPAS1 gene helps the body cope with low oxygen in ways that are advantageous on the plateau. This variant appears to have come from Denisovan ancestry. A gene is not a whole history, and it cannot tell the story of every migration or encounter by itself, but it does show that some Denisovan population possessed biological adaptations later useful to Homo sapiens. The strange consequence is that a vanished lineage may have helped modern humans settle a place where breath itself becomes a challenge. The Denisovans disappear as a separate people, yet one of their solutions to the landscape remains. Mountain routes would also have mattered beyond Tibet. Asia is cut by enormous ranges, the Himalayas, the Pamirs, the Tian Shan, the Altai, and many smaller chains and highlands. These are not simple barriers. They can block movement, but they can also channel it through passes, valleys, and seasonal corridors. Ancient groups may have followed herds along lower routes, crossed uplands during favourable periods, or used river systems that cut through difficult country. A map seen from above may make distances look abstract. On the ground, movement is shaped by snowline water slope shelter and memory. The path that works one year may fail in another. A route used by one generation may become dangerous for the next. Forests add another kind of concealment. In parts of East and Southeast Asia, ancient human populations may have moved through wooded and humid environments where preservation is poor. Tropical and subtropical regions are especially harsh on bone. Heat, moisture, acidic soils, scavengers plant roots, and time can erase bodies that would have survived in colder caves. If Denisovan-related groups lived in these regions, their absence from the fossil record may not mean they were absent from the land. It may mean the land did not keep them. This is one of the lesser-known but crucial details in the Denisovan story. The map of discovery is not the same as the map of life. It is partly a map of preservation. Then there is the drowned world. During glacial periods, sea levels drop as water becomes locked in ice. Vast shelves around Southeast Asia become exposed, creating a landmass often called Sunderland, connecting areas that are now separated by shallow seas. Forests, rivers, coastlines, and plains existed there where today there is water. For migrating Homo sapiens moving toward island Southeast Asia and Oceania, these exposed lands may have formed major corridors and meeting zones. If Denisovan-related populations lived there too, then some of the most important encounters between lineages may have occurred on landscapes now submerged. Camps, bones, paths, and places of contact may lie beneath the sea, or have been destroyed by changing coastlines. No single explanation fully accounts for the missing record, but drowned geography almost certainly steals part of it. This helps explain why Denisovan DNA appears so strongly in regions far from the Siberian cave. The ancestors of people in New Guinea and parts of Oceania carry significant Denisovan ancestry compared with most other populations. That does not necessarily mean Denisovans lived in New Guinea itself, though that remains debated in broader terms. It means that the ancestors of those populations encountered Denisovan-related groups somewhere along their route. The encounter may have happened in mainland Southeast Asia in island regions on exposed Sunda landscapes, or in multiple places over time. Some genetic studies suggest more than one episode of mixing with distinct Denisovan-related populations. Scholars still debate the timing and geography, but the pattern points toward a larger, more complex Denisovan world than fossils alone reveal. The possibility of multiple Denisovan populations is especially important. A lineage spread over immense distances would not remain genetically uniform. Groups separated by mountains, forests, deserts, and climate cycles would diverge. Some may have been closer to the Denisovans of the Altai. Others may have split earlier and developed their own local histories. To modern science, they may all appear under the broad label Denisovan, because they are more closely related to that lineage than to Neanderthals or Homo sapiens. But in life they may have been varied peoples shaped by different climates and roots. The name Denisovan may cover a wide human world that no single cave can represent. As the trail moves through these landscapes, the mystery becomes less like a disappearance from one place, and more like a fading across many edges. A group in a northern valley might be pressured by cold and shifting herds. A highland population might endure longer because few competitors can live there easily. A forest group might be absorbed into incoming Homo sapiens communities without leaving bones behind. A coastal population might vanish from archaeology when the sea rises over its territory. The record does not preserve these endings separately. It gives scattered clues and asks later minds to connect them without overreaching. The Denisovans therefore belong to a geography of hidden roots. Their story is written in caves but also in mountains that regulate breath forests, that erase bone river corridors that guide movement, and seabeds that once held land. They may have lived at the edges of glaciers and monsoons on plateaus and in valleys, in places where survival required a precise knowledge of local conditions. They were not simply waiting to be replaced. They were moving through a changing Asia, adapting where they could, meeting other humans, where roots overlapped and leaving traces in the bodies of descendants who would never know the names of those ancient paths. By following the landscapes, the outline of their world grows wider and stranger. The cave in the Altai remains the first doorway, but it is no longer enough. The Tibetan jaw lifts the story onto the high plateau. Modern genomes pull it toward the south and east. Lower Ice Age seas reveal missing land. Forests explain silence. Mountains explain separation and contact at the same time. What emerges is a lineage whose disappearance cannot be understood only by asking where the bones are. It must also be understood by asking what kinds of places do not preserve bones, what roots are now underwater, what climates closed old corridors, and what encounters left genes instead of graves. The first signs of disappearance do not appear like a door slamming shut. They appear more like a thinning of footprints after snowfall, a trail that continues for a while, then breaks into gaps, then becomes difficult to follow at all. With Denisovans, this thinning is especially hard to measure because the record was never generous in the first place. A lineage known from fragments cannot fade from abundance into scarcity in any obvious way. It begins for modern science already scarce. That makes the question more delicate. When does a people disappear from the earth, and when do they merely disappear from the evidence available to those who come much later? In the Altai, Denisovan presence is recorded across deep time but not as a continuous biography. Layers in Denisova Cave suggest repeated occupation by different human groups, including Denisovans and Neanderthals over long spans. The cave becomes a place of returns rather than permanent possession. A Denisovan group may use it during one period and Neanderthal group during another, perhaps both in the broader region close enough to meet, and later other humans enter the story. Yet the layers do not preserve every season or every generation. They preserve traces separated by time disturbance and interpretation. The evidence remains incomplete, and the cave's silence between signals may mean absence, or it may simply mean that a visit left nothing recoverable. This uncertainty is central to the problem of disappearance. If Denisovan bones are rare, a lack of bones from a later period cannot prove they're gone everywhere. If sediment DNA appears in one layer and not another, the gap may reflect real population change, but it may also reflect preservation sampling or the ordinary unevenness of ancient sites. If a tool tradition shifts, the maker may have changed, or the same people may have adopted different methods. The deeper the record, the harder it is to separate a vanished population from a vanished trace. In that sense, the Denisovan disappearance begins not with a known last day, but with a growing mismatch between the genetic importance of the lineage and the physical scarcity of its remains. Somewhere between roughly the middle and later parts of the late Pleistocene, the human world begins to change. Homo sapiens populations expand more widely across Eurasia. This expansion is not one simple march, but it changes the human balance wherever it lasts. Modern humans bring their own technologies, social networks, symbolic behaviors, mobility patterns, and ways of adapting to varied landscapes. They also bring numbers, though not necessarily large numbers by modern standards. In a world where human populations are small and scattered, even modest differences in group size, survival rates, exchange networks, and reproductive success can matter over thousands of years. A lineage does not have to be violently destroyed to be overwhelmed. It can be slowly outnumbered, absorbed, pushed toward marginal zones, or reduced by repeated small failures that leave no dramatic archaeological scar. For Denisovans, the signs of such pressure are indirect. Their DNA enters the ancestors of some modern populations, meaning contact occurs. But after those encounters, Denisovans as a separate lineage become harder to find. Their genetic contribution survives in fragments, while later human populations continue and spread. That pattern can be read in several ways. It may suggest that Homo sapiens groups met Denisovan-related groups, interbred with them, and eventually became the dominant surviving population. It may suggest that Denisovan communities were already fragmented by climate or ecology before modern human expansion intensified. It may suggest different endings in different regions. Scholars still debate the balance of these forces, and no single explanation fully accounts for this. One subtle clue lies in population size. Ancient DNA from Denisovan remains suggests that their history may have involved small or structured populations, though the details are complex and still studied. Small populations are vulnerable in ways that large ones are not. A hard winter, a failed hunt, a disease outbreak, a loss of fertile adults, or separation from neighboring groups can leave lasting effects. If groups are scattered across huge landscapes but rarely connected, each local population may carry its own risk. The disappearance of a lineage can then happen not as one extinction, but as a series of local endings, each too small to be preserved. A valley empties, a cave is no longer visited, a high route falls out of use, a coastal group merges with newcomers. Over time, the separate name science gives them becomes impossible to locate in living bodies except as inherited fragments. Climate adds further instability. The late Pleistocene is not a smooth descent into cold followed by a clean warming. It is full of pulses, oscillations, abrupt shifts, and regional differences. Grasslands expand and shrink, forests fragment. Glaciers grow and retreat. Monsoon systems change. Animal populations decline or become less predictable. For humans who depend on close knowledge of local landscapes, these changes can loosen the foundations of survival. A group adapted to one seasonal pattern may have to move when animals change their routes. A reliable cave may become less useful if the surrounding resources shift. A highland population may endure cold but struggle if prey becomes scarce. What survives in the record suggests that Denisovans were adaptable, but adaptability is not invincibility. It is tempting to imagine a final Denisovan community facing an obvious catastrophe, a volcanic winter, a devastating drought, a sudden invasion, or a disease that sweeps through the last camps. Such scenes are dramatic, but the evidence does not allow them as a single answer. There may have been local catastrophes, there may have been brutal seasons, there may have been violence between groups as there has been in many human histories, but there is no clear Denisovan Pompeii, no burned last settlement, no final cemetery marking the end. Their fading is quieter and therefore more difficult. The record does not point to one great collapse. It points to disappearance through processes that leave only broken signals. One lesser-known possibility is that the disappearance was partly a problem of identity. If Denisovan groups interbred repeatedly with expanding Homo sapiens populations, their descendants might not vanish biologically. Instead, over generations they may become part of larger modern human communities. Their distinctive genome would be diluted but not erased. Their local knowledge might be absorbed, changed, or forgotten. Their children's children might carry Denisovan ancestry while living within groups that archaeology would identify as Homo sapiens. In that case, the end of the Denisovans as a separate lineage would not require the death of every Denisovan individual. It would require the loss of separation. This idea gives the word disappearance a strange softness. It is not comforting exactly because cultures, languages, traditions, and identities can disappear even when genes continue, but it is different from a clean extinction. The Denisovans may have ended partly by becoming ancestors. Their bodies may have vanished into other populations. Their faces may have blended into the living stream of Homo sapiens. Their genes may have continued where their independent communities did not. The evidence remains incomplete, yet modern genomes make this much clear: the lineage did not leave the world without leaving something behind. Still, genetic survival is uneven. Some living populations carry more Denisovan ancestry than others. Many carry little or none. The distribution is not random. It reflects ancient encounters along particular routes and in particular regions. This unevenness suggests that Denisovan-related groups did not all disappear in the same way at the same time. Some met the ancestors of Oceanians, some contributed ancestry in parts of Asia, others may have left no detectable descendants, or their signals may be too faint to isolate. A whole map of lost meetings lies behind the present distribution of genes, and most of that map remains unmarked by fossils. The visible trail continues to thin. The cave layers grow quieter. The bones do not multiply. The genetic evidence points outward, but the physical evidence lags behind. In this gap, the Denisovans become one of the most haunting examples of how a human lineage can be historically enormous and archaeologically fragile at once. They are important enough to reshape the human family tree, yet elusive enough that every new fragment changes the picture. Their disappearance begins to look less like an event than a failure of continuity. Continuity of population, continuity of evidence, continuity of separateness. By the time their signals fade, the world is moving toward the one human planet of the present. Neanderthals also disappear as a distinct population. Island lineages vanish. Other possible archaic humans leave uncertain traces. Homo sapiens remain carrying pieces of some of those lost relatives within them. The Denisovans once spread across mountains, plateaus, forests, and perhaps drowned lowlands, become a hidden inheritance. The first signs of their disappearance are therefore not only found in what is missing from caves, they are found in the contrast between an ancient world where many humans exist and a later world where only one visible human lineage remains. The silence does not explain itself. It only deepens layer by layer until the vanished people survive most clearly in those who are not entirely separate from them. Climate does not enter the Denisovan story as a single villain. It is older, slower, and more relentless than that. Long before any final fading of their lineage, the Ice Age world keeps changing the rules of survival. The land is not fixed beneath their feet in the way a modern map suggests. It opens and closes. It grows colder, then warmer, then colder again. Rains shift. Forests retreat. Grasslands spread. Glaciers thicken in distant mountains and lock water away from the sea. Coastlines move outward, then drown again. For people living without written records, without metal, without agriculture, and without the safety nets of large settled societies, these changes arrive as practical facts. Fewer animals in a valley, deeper snow across a pass, a river behaving differently. Familiar plants failing a season, no longer matching memory. The Denisovans appear to have been highly adaptable, and that makes their vulnerability more interesting rather than less. They are linked with cold northern environments, with high-altitude landscapes, and with genetic traces that point towards southern roots of human contact. This suggests flexibility across different ecologies, yet the late Pleistocene is a period in which flexibility is constantly tested. The climate does not merely change once, it pulses. Abrupt warmings and coolings ripple through ecosystems. Some regions become more open and dry, while others become wetter or more forested. A group well adapted to one pattern may find itself living through another. The skills that worked for several generations can become less reliable, and in small populations even a slight loss of reliability can matter. In northern Eurasia, cold phases expand open steppe and tundra-like environments. Such landscapes can support large grazing animals, but they are also exposed seasonal and demanding. During warmer intervals, forests may return, changing the animals available, and the ways humans must hunt and move. For a group accustomed to following certain prey, or using particular valleys at particular times, these shifts can force difficult choices. Remaining in place may mean facing reduced food. Moving may mean crossing unfamiliar territory, encountering other human groups, or entering landscapes already occupied. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives suggests that Denisovan populations lived in regions where such decisions would have repeated across thousands of years. The Tibetan Plateau adds another layer of pressure. High-altitude environments are difficult even when stable. During climatic swings they can become harsher still. Cold wind, low oxygen, and patchy resources combine into a world where survival requires precision. If Denisovan-related groups lived there for long periods, they must have carried both biological and cultural adaptations. But no adaptation protects against every change. A shift in animal migration, a sequence of severe winters, or a change in plant productivity could make an already marginal landscape harder. The Denisovan genetic contribution to high-altitude adaptation in modern Tibetans is powerful evidence of their long relationship with such environments, but it does not mean every Denisovan highland group endured indefinitely. Adaptation can buy time, it cannot stop history. Farther south, monsoon systems may have shaped another part of their world. In Asia, rainfall patterns can transform entire environments. Strong monsoons can support forests, wetlands, and rich river systems. Weaker monsoons can dry landscapes, fragment habitats, and alter the distribution of animals and plants. If Denisovan-related populations lived across parts of East or Southeast Asia, they would have experienced these shifting patterns not as climate statistics, but as changes in daily possibility. A reliable foraging area might become less productive. A river crossing might become dangerous or vanish seasonally. Forest animals might move. Open country prey might expand. Humans who can adjust may survive, but adjustment often requires contact movement and enough people to carry knowledge forward. Population size may be where climate becomes most dangerous. Large populations can absorb local failures. If one region suffers, connections to another may help. If one group loses members, neighbouring groups may replenish marriages, alliances, and knowledge. Small scattered populations have less protection. A Denisovan group isolated by mountains, deserts, forests, or simple distance could be pushed below a sustainable threshold by repeated environmental stress. Not every crisis needs to be catastrophic. Several modest failures over generations can have the same effect as one dramatic disaster. Fewer births, more deaths, reduced contact with neighbouring groups, and shrinking territory can slowly turn resilience into fragility. This is one reason the disappearance may have felt sudden in the record while being slow in life. Archaeology compresses time. A few thousand years can become a thin layer or a gap. A local decline that unfolds over centuries may leave no emotional trace in the sediment. A group may survive through hardship, recover partly, then shrink again, and later researchers may see only intermittent signals. The record may show presence, then silence, but the lives behind that silence could include long attempts to adapt. No single explanation fully accounts for the end because climate rarely acts alone. It weakens, redirects fragments, and exposes. Other pressures then find populations already under strain. Those other pressures include animals as well as humans. Climate change reshapes ecosystems from the bottom upward. Plants respond to temperature and rainfall. Herbivores respond to plants. Carnivores respond to herbivores. Humans as hunters and foragers respond to all of them. In Ice Age environments, large animals are not only food, they are moving reservoirs of fat, hides, bone, and opportunity. If herds shift their routes or decline in a region, human groups must reorganize their own lives. A familiar hunting ground can become a memory. A cave well placed for one ecological phase can become poorly placed for another. The landscape that once made Denisova Cave useful may have changed many times, altering which groups could thrive nearby. There is also the problem of competition, though the word can be misleading. Competition does not always mean open conflict. It can mean two human groups using the same river valley in different seasons. It can mean one group arriving earlier at a carcass or hunting zone. It can mean the gradual occupation of the best shelters, the most reliable crossings, or the richest toolstone sources. As Homo sapiens populations expand through Asia, climate-stressed Denisovan groups may have found themselves sharing increasingly important spaces with newcomers. In times of abundance, coexistence may be easier. In times of scarcity, overlap becomes costly. Scholars still debate how much direct competition mattered, but environmental pressure would have made every encounter more consequential. Disease is another possibility, though harder to see. When human groups meet after long periods of separation, they may exchange pathogens as well as genes, tools, and knowledge. The ancient record rarely preserves such episodes clearly, especially so far back in time. It would be irresponsible to claim disease as a main cause without stronger evidence. Yet it remains part of the wider range of possible pressures, especially for small populations. A sickness that a larger group can survive might devastate an isolated community. The evidence remains incomplete. and disease belongs among the shadow causes that may have mattered without leaving obvious marks. Climate also affects memory. A people's knowledge is tied to landscapes, paths, water sources, hunting places, safe shelters, seasonal expectations, and danger zones are all learned across generations. When climate shifts too quickly or too often, inherited knowledge can lose some of its power. The old path still exists, but the animals no longer come. The old shelter remains, but the surrounding valley is poorer. The old crossing is open, but a rival group now uses it. This is a quieter form of collapse than starvation or violence. It is the slow weakening of the relationship between a people and the world they know best. The Denisovans may have endured many such changes before their final fading. Their long survival suggests strength, not weakness. They were not simply victims of weather. They crossed difficult terrain, occupied demanding environments, and left adaptations valuable enough to survive in modern humans. But in deep time, even successful lineages can be caught between changes too large and too repeated to overcome. A lineage adapted to several worlds may still lose if those worlds fracture at the same time that another human population expands, interbreeds, competes, and carries wider networks into the same territories. The old world turns against them not with a single blow, but with 1,000 adjustments. A colder valley here, a drier forest there, a drowned plain later, a herd moving beyond reach, a mountain route closing earlier in the season, a neighbouring group disappearing, leaving fewer mates and less exchange, a new human population entering a corridor that once connected Denisovan communities. Over generations, these pressures can turn a broad lineage into scattered remnants. And scattered remnants are vulnerable to being absorbed, replaced, or simply lost. By the time the Denisovan trail grows faint, climate has already done much of its quiet work. It has rearranged the board on which all human lineages move. It has favoured mobility in some places, isolation in others, and contact where roots tighten. It has hidden evidence beneath seas-destroyed bones in humid forests, and preserved only rare fragments in caves and high places. The disappearance of the Denisovans cannot be explained by climate alone, but it cannot be understood without it. The changing earth is the great pressure around the human drama, the force that turns survival into a moving target. In that unstable world, the old human lineages face not one ending but a long test, and the Denisovans move toward the point where adaptation, contact, and chance begin to converge. Into this unstable world come the expanding groups of Homo sapiens, not as a single army, not as a sudden wave with one purpose, but as families, bands, travellers, hunters, gatherers, experimenters, and survivors, moving through corridors that earlier humans had known in different ways. Their arrival is not the beginning of humanity in Eurasia. Other humans are already there. Neanderthals have their long western territories. Denisovans and Denisovan-related groups hold parts of the eastern world perhaps far more widely than their fossils can yet show. Other isolated populations live in islands, forests, and highlands. The earth is already inhabited by human minds before modern humans become the only visible human form left. That fact gives every later encounter a strange intimacy. Homo sapiens carry their own deep history from Africa, and that history is not simple. Different populations expand at different times, some leaving little lasting ancestry, others becoming part of the great dispersals that eventually reach Europe, Asia, Australia, and the Americas. By the time modern human groups move across southern Asia, in enduring numbers, they likely carry flexible toolkits, broad social networks, symbolic traditions, and a capacity to live in many environments. None of these traits should be turned into a crude claim of superiority. Neanderthals and Denisovans also survive in hard worlds for astonishing lengths of time. Still, small advantages in connection, innovation, population structure, or range can matter greatly over thousands of years. The first meetings between Homo sapiens and Denisovan-related groups are mostly invisible. No scene survives intact. There's no cave wall showing two lineages facing each other across a fire. There's no preserved camp with both groups' footprints labelled by time. What remains is genetic. Somewhere in Asia, the ancestors of some modern humans have children with Denisovan-related people. These encounters are real enough that fragments of Denisovan ancestry still live in present-day populations, especially in parts of Oceania and Asia. The evidence remains incomplete, but it shows contact beyond doubt. The vanished lineage does not vanish before modern humans arrive. It meets them. What those meetings felt like cannot be known with certainty. They may have included avoidance, curiosity, tension, cooperation, violence, exchange, and kinship in different places and at different times. Human groups are rarely governed by one kind of relationship. Even within the same species, neighbouring communities can trade, raid, intermarry, ignore, imitate, or fear one another. Across closely related human lineages, the range may have been just as varied. Some encounters may have been brief and cautious. Others may have led to lasting family ties. The Denisovan ancestry in living people proves that at least some contacts were intimate enough to produce descendants who survived. This makes the disappearance more complicated than a replacement story. The older narrative imagined modern humans spreading outward and simply pushing older humans aside. There may have been competition. There may have been violence. There may have been ecological pressure made worse by newcomers using the same resources. But ancient DNA shows that boundaries were porous. Modern humans did not merely replace archaic lineages from outside. They also absorbed parts of them. Neanderthal ancestry enters many non-African populations. Denisovan ancestry enters others. In some living people, the vanished relatives are not external ghosts. They are part of the biological inheritance of the present. Still, absorption can be a form of ending. If Denisovan groups are small and Homo sapiens groups are larger or more connected, repeated interbreeding may gradually reduce Denisovan identity as a separate population. A child born between communities may grow up in one group or another. Descendants may marry into expanding Homo sapiens networks. Denisovan genes may persist, while Denisovan social worlds shrink. Over many generations, the line between coexistence and disappearance blurs. The final Denisovan, if such a person could even be defined, may not have died alone in an empty cave. The ending may have unfolded through families whose descendants increasingly belong to another population. This possibility does not erase loss. Genes are not culture. A Denisovan contribution to modern human ancestry does not preserve their languages, their gestures, their childhood lessons, their ways of reading weather, their remembered places, or their meanings for kinship and death. If they had songs, stories, taboos, ornaments, or rituals, those are gone unless they were transmitted and transformed beyond recognition. Biological survival can coexist with cultural disappearance. This is one of the quiet tragedies of deep time. A lineage may continue in fragments, while the world it understood disappears completely. The arrival of Homo sapiens also changes the demographic landscape. Modern human groups may have maintained wider connections across territories, allowing information, mates, and materials to move between communities over larger distances. Such networks can buffer risk. If one band suffers, others remain. If a tool technique spreads, many groups benefit. If symbolic objects or social customs strengthen distant ties, alliances may expand. Scholars still debate how much these advantages distinguished Homo sapiens from other lineages, and when they became decisive, but the possibility matters. In unstable climates, connection can be as important as cleverness. A small isolated group may know its homeland deeply, yet a wider network can survive when one homeland fails. Technology may have played a role, though again the picture is not simple. Modern humans in some regions develop diverse tool traditions, use bone antler shell pigments and long-distance materials, and create objects that suggest symbolic communication. But stone tools alone do not always identify their makers. Some technologies may be shared across groups or independently invented. Neanderthals and possibly Denisovans are not technologically empty. The evidence remains incomplete, especially for Denisovans whose material culture is difficult to isolate. It is safer to say that Homo sapiens may have carried combinations of technology, social learning mobility and group size that became powerful under late Pleistocene conditions rather than claiming one magical invention explains everything. There is also the matter of speed. Homo sapiens eventually spread across an extraordinary range of environments: deserts, coasts, forests, tundra margins, islands, highlands, and eventually continents beyond Eurasia. This expansion suggests a capacity for rapid adjustment and cultural flexibility. In southern Asia and towards Sahel, the combined Ice Age landmass of Australia and New Guinea, modern humans cross difficult ecological and maritime thresholds. Along those routes, contact with Denisovan-related groups likely occurs. The fact that significant Denisovan ancestry is found in Oceania means that somewhere before or during these movements, modern humans encounter a population that had been in Asia long enough to diverge deeply from the Denisovans known in Siberia. That detail opens a strange possibility. Some Denisovan-related populations may have been living in southern regions long before Homo sapiens arrived, adapted to forests, islands, coasts, or lowland river systems now poorly preserved. When modern humans moved through these areas, they may not have found empty land but old human territories. The meeting between lineages could have taken place in landscapes that are now drowned, eroded, or hidden beneath dense vegetation. The genetic signal survives while the meeting place itself may be gone. What survives in the record suggests contact, but not the full geography of contact. Competition when it occurs may have been subtle and cumulative. Homo sapiens did not need to defeat Denisovans in direct conflict everywhere. They may have occupied key routes, formed larger mating networks, exploited wider resource ranges, or recovered faster after bad seasons. They may have brought new pathogens, though evidence for this remains uncertain. They may have changed predator-prey dynamics simply by adding another human presence to the landscape. In a valley already under climate stress, one more human group using the same animals and shelters could make life harder. In a coastal corridor, faster-moving newcomers might absorb or bypass small resident populations. In a highland region, Denisovan adaptations may have remained valuable, but if their numbers were low, even useful adaptations could pass into Homo sapiens, while the original communities declined. Yet the story should not be reduced to invasion. There were likely places where Denisovans and Homo sapiens coexisted for generations. A mixed child proves that different lineages could become family at least between Denisovans and Neanderthals, and genetic inheritance proves the same broad truth for Denisovans and modern humans. Some contacts may have involved learning. Modern humans entering unfamiliar Asian landscapes may have benefited from local knowledge, whether directly through exchange and intermarriage, or indirectly through occupying routes already shaped by older populations. The Denisovan high-altitude gene is a biological example of such inheritance. Culture may have moved too, but if it did, the evidence is much harder to isolate. As Homo sapiens continue to expand, the older plural human world begins to narrow. Neanderthals disappear in Western Eurasia. Denisovan traces become genetic rather than visibly archaeological. Island lineages vanish. The process is not synchronized everywhere, and the dates remain debated in many regions, but the direction is clear. The human family tree loses its living side branches. The surviving species carries fragments of some of them onward, but the shared world of multiple human forms ends. For Denisovans, the arrival of Homo sapiens may be less like a single catastrophe and more like a changing gravity. Everything begins to lean in a new direction. Contacts produce mixed descendants, networks shift, territories overlap, climate stress continues. Small populations face new pressures from neighbors who can move, connect, and reproduce across widening ranges. Some Denisovan communities may disappear without meeting modern humans directly weakened by environmental change. Others may be absorbed through contact. Others may leave only genetic traces in people moving toward lands the Denisovans themselves never reached. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation fully accounts for this. The vanished lineage is therefore not simply erased by modern humans, it is entangled with them. The expansion of Homo sapiens is both a pressure and a bridge, both a possible cause of decline and the reason part of the Denisovan inheritance survives at all. The old human world narrows, but it does not close cleanly. It folds into the present through ancestry adaptation and the silence of places where bones did not last. The Denisovans meet the ancestors of modern people somewhere in the vastness of Asia, and after those meetings their separate trail grows fainter. But the meeting itself means the ending is not pure disappearance. It is contact transformation and loss woven together so tightly that the boundary between them can no longer be fully untangled. The mystery of the Denisovans becomes most intimate when it leaves the cave floor and enters the living body. Bones can vanish, tools can be misread, camps can drown beneath rising seas, but DNA sometimes carries a quieter archive across thousands of generations. In the case of the Denisovans, that archive reveals an ending that is not an ending in the ordinary sense. Their separate communities disappear from view, yet pieces of their inheritance remain scattered through modern humans. The lineage is gone as a visible branch of humanity, but not entirely erased. It survives in fragments, unevenly distributed, altered by time, and often hidden inside people who would never know without genetic science that part of their ancestry reaches back to a vanished human form. This is why ancient DNA changed the story so profoundly. Before genetics, extinct human relatives had to be recognized mainly through bones and artifacts. A fossil could show shape. A stone tool could show behavior. A burial where present could suggest care ritual or social complexity. But genes reveal relationships that the eye cannot see. They show that some boundaries between ancient human groups were crossed. They show that contact did not always end in separation. They show that a lineage can fade from the fossil record while remaining in diluted form within the descendants of another. For Denisovans, this is not a side detail. It is one of the central facts of their existence. The strongest Denisovan ancestry known today appears in populations of Oceania, especially among indigenous peoples of New Guinea and nearby regions, though Denisovan genetic traces are also found in parts of Asia at lower levels. This pattern is striking because the first recognized Denisovan remains came from Siberia far to the north. The DNA in living people points toward encounters somewhere along the routes taken by the ancestors of these populations as they moved through Asia and toward Sahul, the Ice Age landmass that included Australia, New Guinea and Tasmania. The exact geography remains debated. The meeting may have happened in mainland Southeast Asia, in island regions on exposed lands now underwater, or through several encounters with different Denisovan-related populations. The evidence remains incomplete, but the broad conclusion is clear. Denisovan-related humans once existed far beyond the cave that named them. This distribution also suggests that Denisovans were not a single small population living in one corner of Siberia. Some genetic studies point toward deeply diverged Denisovan-related groups, contributing ancestry to different modern populations. In other words, the Denisovan world may have contained several branches of its own, separated for long periods across Asia. The label Denisovan may hide a great internal diversity, much as the label Homo sapiens includes many populations spread over wide territories. Scholars still debate how many Denisovan-related groups existed and where they lived, but the genetic signals make the old picture of one obscure cave population impossible to maintain. One of the most famous Denisovan inheritances involves life at high altitude. Many Tibetans carry a version of the EPAS1 gene associated with efficient adaptation to low oxygen environments. Genetic evidence indicates that this variant came from Denisovan ancestry. This does not mean Denisovans were the only humans ever capable of living at altitude, nor does it explain the entire history of Tibetan adaptation by itself. Human adaptation is always complex. But it does mean that a vanished lineage contributed a biological tool that later helped modern humans thrive on the Tibetan plateau. A fragment of Denisovan survival became part of another people's endurance. There is something quietly astonishing in that. A Denisovan population may have spent generations under thin air shaped by the demands of altitude, cold movement and hunger. Their separate communities eventually disappeared. Yet one inherited variation tested by that old landscape entered Homo sapiens and remained useful. The vanished lineage is not remembered in story or inscription, but in blood oxygen regulation. This is not the kind of legacy ancient kings imagined, but it may be far older and more durable than any carved monument. Other Denisovan genetic contributions may involve immune function and responses to environment, though the details are more complex and sometimes less certain. When different human lineages interbred, they exchange not only ancestry, but adaptations shaped by long experience in different regions. A population that had lived in Asia for hundreds of thousands of years may have carried genetic variants useful for local pathogens, climates, or diets. Incoming Homo sapiens groups encountering new ecological pressures could sometimes benefit from these inherited variants. This process is known as adaptive introgression, but behind the technical term is a simple and powerful idea. Contact with older human lineages may have helped modern humans survive places they were newly entering. Still, not every inherited fragment is beneficial. Ancient ancestry is not a treasure chest of perfect adaptations. Some variants may be neutral, some may have been useful in one context and less useful in another. Some may have been lost over time because natural selection reduced them, or simply because chance removed them from small populations. The Denisovan legacy in modern genomes is patchy because history is patchy. Encounters happened in some regions and not others. Descendants expanded or declined. Selection favoured certain variants and removed others. Genetic drift blurred the signal. What remains is not a complete archive, but a damaged map of contact. The presence of Denisovan DNA in modern humans also changes the emotional meaning of extinction. If a lineage leaves no descendants, extinction seems absolute. If a lineage leaves descendants only through mixture, the ending becomes harder to name. The Denisovans did disappear as a separate population. There are no known living Denisovan communities, no continuous Denisovan culture, no preserved language, no remembered identity. But their ancestry did not vanish entirely. It entered other human groups and travelled forward under new names, new cultures, and new histories. The result is neither survival in the full sense nor extinction in the clean sense. It is a blurred ending. This blurred ending makes the Denisovans different from many vanished civilizations. A collapsed city may leave walls, pottery roads, and ruins even if its people scatter. A lost empire may survive in texts written by enemies. A destroyed settlement may leave burn layers and broken weapons. The Denisovans leave something more elusive. Their ruins are partly genomic. Their archive is written across chromosomes, recombined and shortened over thousands of years. Their presence is not visible in the mirror, not in any simple way, but it can be detected statistically by comparing living genomes with ancient ones and tracing segments that do not come from recent Homo sapiens ancestry. This also means that modern people carry within them evidence of a once more crowded human planet. A person with Denisovan ancestry does not become less Homo sapiens. Human identity is not divided into neat percentages of worth or belonging. But biologically, the inheritance shows that the ancestors of living people were not isolated from other human forms. They met them, had children with them, and carried parts of them onward. The modern human genome is not a pure line descending untouched from one origin. It is a record of movement, mixture, survival, and loss. The Denisovan signal is also a warning against overconfidence. For a long time, no one knew this lineage existed. Then a tiny bone changed the story. If one previously unknown human group can be revealed by genetics, others may remain hidden in fossils not yet tested, sediments not yet sampled, or living genomes not yet fully understood. Some researchers have already identified hints of ancestry from unknown archaic populations in ancient and modern genomes, though such signals must be interpreted carefully. The evidence remains incomplete, but the possibility is real. The human family tree may still contain ghost branches whose bones are missing and whose names will be given only after their DNA is noticed. This is the deep power of the Denisovan genome. It does not simply prove that one group existed. It changes the method by which disappearance can be studied. A vanished lineage no longer needs a complete skeleton to be historically real. It can be reconstructed through relation inheritance and absence. It can be known through the genes it passed on, the adaptations it contributed, and the differences it left behind in people living far from the place of discovery. The cave in Siberia gives the lineage a name, but the living genome gives it reach, and so the Denisovans become most visible through a paradox. They disappear from the world of separate human populations, yet they remain inside the only human species still walking the earth. Their bones are rare, but their fragments of ancestry are widespread enough to matter. Their faces are unknown, but their biological legacy helps shape real bodies in real environments. Their culture is silent, but their genetic presence keeps speaking in a language science has only recently learned to hear. The vanished lineage is not behind humanity like a closed chapter. It is within humanity, broken into small pieces carried forward without memory, waiting tens of thousands of years for someone to notice that the disappearance had never been complete. The caves remember, but they remember too little. That is one of the strangest frustrations of the Denisovan story. A cave can preserve a bone fragment through tens of thousands of years, protect DNA long after the body around it has disappeared, hold ashstone flakes, animal remains, and layers of ancient soil, and still refuse to give a complete account of who passed through its darkness. Denisova Cave is rich by the standards of deep prehistory, yet the richness is uneven. It offers a child's finger bone, massive teeth, traces of Neanderthals, traces of Denisovans, traces of mixing, and the faint signals of repeated occupation. But it does not offer the whole people. It does not show a full Denisovan body standing in the light. It does not show how many they were, how often they came, where they went when they left, or how their life changed from one generation to the next. This is not a failure of archaeology. It is the ordinary cruelty of time. Most lives leave almost nothing. Even in a cave, preservation is selective. bones can be chewed, scattered, dissolved, trampled, burned, or missed. Sediments shift. Water moves through layers. Animals disturb deposits. Later occupations cut into earlier ones. A fragment may survive because of a small accident of chemistry, while a whole body nearby may vanish completely. The record that seems so solid in museums is actually a collection of lucky survivals. For every bone recovered, many more were destroyed. For every tool found, countless perishable objects disappeared. For every cave layer sampled, vast landscapes outside the cave left no durable archive at all. Denisova Cave is especially powerful because it preserves different human lineages in the same long sequence. Yet that very power creates difficulties. When Neanderthals, Denisovans, and possibly later Homo sapiens use the same place across different periods, the cave becomes a palimpsest, a page written over many times. Archaeologists can separate layers with great care, but ancient deposits do not always behave like clean pages in a book. Material can move downward or upward. Small bones can shift. Tools may be found without directly associated human remains. Sediment DNA can reveal presence, but presence does not always explain behavior. A trace of Denisovan DNA in a layer can say that Denisovans were there, or that their biological material entered the sediment, but it cannot by itself describe the social world around that trace. This is why caves can be both generous and misleading. They preserve what open-air sites often lose, but they also concentrate evidence in unusual places. A cave is not the same as a whole territory. It may be a shelter, a hunting stop, a ritual place, a seasonal refuge, a predator den, or all of these at different times. People may live most of their lives outside in camps made of wood, hide brush, or other materials that rarely survive. They may travel along rivers, across plains, through forests and over passes, leaving only scattered stone and butchered bone. Later, the cave becomes the main witness because it is where evidence lasted. The danger is that modern observers mistake the witness for the world itself. For the Denisovans, this problem is magnified by the scarcity of fossils elsewhere. If more bones had been found across Asia, the cave could be placed within a broader anatomical pattern. Instead, every fragment carries enormous weight. A large molar becomes a clue to the entire lineage. A jaw from the Tibetan plateau changes the map. A sediment sample can extend a timeline. This makes each discovery exciting but also risky. Scholars must resist building too much from too little. The evidence remains incomplete, and responsible interpretation has to move between the desire for a story and the discipline of uncertainty. The Tibetan evidence offers a clear example. The Baishya Khas cave jaw gives Denisovans, or a closely related group, a stronger physical presence beyond Siberia. It links them to high altitude and helps explain the genetic connection to Tibetan adaptation. Yet even there, the find does not reveal a full population history. One jaw cannot show how many groups lived on the plateau, whether they occupied it continuously or seasonally, how their technology changed, or how they related to Denisovans elsewhere. It opens a door, but the room beyond remains dim. What survives in the record suggests a broader world, not its full details. The same is true for the genetic traces in living people. Modern genomes reveal that Denisovan-related ancestry entered Homo sapiens, but they do not provide a complete map of Denisovan settlements. Genetic segments can point toward ancient mixing estimate rough relationships and suggest multiple Denisovan-related populations. But the locations, cultures, and daily lives behind those genetic events remain partly hidden. A gene can show contact without showing the camp where it happened. It can preserve inheritance without preserving memory. It can prove that two lineages met while leaving every human circumstance of that meeting unknown. One lesser-known revolution has come from sediment DNA, which allows researchers to detect ancient humans even without visible fossils. In some cave deposits, fragments of genetic material preserved in soil can identify whether Denisovans, Neanderthals, or modern humans were present. This changes what a site can say. A layer once considered biologically silent may suddenly reveal a human trace. It is a remarkable advance, but it is not magic. Sediment DNA can be degraded, contaminated, moved, or absent despite occupation. Its interpretation depends on context, careful sampling, and comparison. It adds a new voice to the cave, but that voice still speaks in fragments. There are also many places where the cave record fails entirely, because there are no caves, or because the caves have not been found, or because preservation conditions are poor. Tropical Southeast Asia is one of the great missing archives in this story. Warm, humid environments destroy ancient DNA quickly and often damage bone. If Denisovan-related populations lived in forests, lowlands, or island regions, they may have left little recoverable evidence. The absence is not neutral. It shapes the story by making cold caves and high-altitude sites seem more important simply because they preserve better. This creates a distorted mirror of the past. The places most likely to keep evidence are not always the places where most people lived. Open-air sites are even more vulnerable. A camp beside a river may be washed away. A coastal settlement may be drowned by rising seas. A forest shelter may decay until nothing remains but a few stone flakes, and even those may be buried beyond reach. During the late Ice Age, lowered sea levels exposed immense areas of land in Southeast Asia. After the glaciers melted, seas rose and covered many of those landscapes. If Denisovan-related humans met Homo sapiens there, the archaeological evidence may now lie underwater or may have been destroyed during marine transgression. The record does not simply have gaps. Some of its pages have been physically removed. This scarcity explains why debates about Denisovan range remain so active. Fossils from East Asia sometimes show traits that do not fit comfortably into simple categories. Some researchers have suggested that certain remains might be Denisovan or Denisovan-related, while others urge caution without genetic or protein confirmation. The problem is not lack of interest. It is that ancient human variation is complex, and bones do not always declare their lineage. A jaw tooth or skull fragment may share features with several populations. Without DNA, assignments can remain uncertain. Scholars still debate these possibilities because the evidence is suggestive but not always decisive. The result is a lineage that is both scientifically real and visually elusive. Denisovans are not speculative in the way fringe ideas are speculative. Their DNA proves their existence. Their interbreeding with other humans is established. Their contribution to living populations is measurable. Yet their appearance, culture, geographic range, and final disappearance remain partly unresolved. This combination gives them their peculiar power. They are not a myth, but they occupy a space where facts and absences sit close together. The caves remember too little because deep time takes almost everything. It takes skin hair, voices, gestures, languages, names, most tools, most camps, and most bodies. It leaves a tooth where a population should be a jaw, where a landscape should be a genetic fragment, where a face should be. The Denisovan story has to be built from those remnants without pretending they are more complete than they are. And yet the remnants are enough to overturn an older human story. They are enough to show that Asia once held human lineages still poorly known. They are enough to show that modern humanity carries pieces of those lineages. They are enough to make the silence meaningful. So the search continues not because the caves have answered the question, but because they have asked it more sharply. Each fragment proves that the missing world was real. Each gap warns against easy certainty. The Denisovans disappear partly because they truly cease to exist as a separate lineage, but they also disappear because the Earth preserved them badly. Their history lies scattered across caves, plateaus, drowned plains, living genomes and untested fossils. The record is not empty. It is broken. And in those breaks, the vanished human lineage remains just out of reach, close enough to recognize, too incomplete to fully restore. The fading of the Denisovans can be explained in several ways, and each explanation carries part of the truth without being large enough to hold the whole. This is where the mystery becomes most difficult, because disappearance in deep prehistory rarely leaves a single cause lying neatly in the soil. There is no final Denisovan inscription, no last camp preserved under ash, no ancient observer recording the moment when one kind of human gives way to another. Instead, the evidence points toward a braided ending made from interbreeding population, decline, climate stress, ecological pressure, competition, and chance. Each strand matters. None can be pulled out alone and called the answer. One possibility is absorption. In this version of the story, Denisovans do not simply die out in isolation. They meet expanding Homo sapiens groups, have children with them, and slowly become part of larger modern human populations. Their separate communities shrink, but their genes continue. This explanation fits the genetic evidence in an important way. Denisovan ancestry survives in living people, especially in parts of Oceania and Asia, and some inherited variants appear to have been useful in specific environments. The vanished lineage therefore did not leave the world without descendants. It entered another lineage and continued in fragments. Yet absorption alone cannot explain everything. If Denisovan groups were numerous and widespread, why did their distinct identity not continue somewhere? Why did their ancestry remain substantial in some populations, but faint or absent in many others? Why are their visible fossils so rare? Interbreeding shows contact, but it does not automatically explain decline. A population can mix with another and still remain separate. For absorption to become disappearance, other pressures likely have to be involved: smaller numbers, fragmented territories, stronger Homo sapiens networks, climate instability, or repeated local losses. The evidence remains incomplete, but the genetic records suggest blending was part of the ending, not the whole ending. Replacement is another explanation, though the word can sound more violent and simple than the evidence permits. In replacement models, Homo sapiens expand into regions occupied by older human lineages and eventually become the only surviving population. This could happen through direct competition, better survival rates, wider social networks, faster recovery from crisis, more flexible technologies, or simple demographic momentum. It does not require organized conflict, though conflict may have occurred in some places. Even without warfare, two groups using similar food sources and shelters can place pressure on one another, especially during climatic stress. If one group has larger networks and more frequent exchange of mates, tools, and information, it may endure hardships that break smaller communities, but replacement also needs caution. It can easily turn into an old triumphal story as though Homo sapiens were destined to sweep away all others because they were inherently superior. That is not what the evidence demands. Neanderthals survived for hundreds of thousands of years. Denisovans appear to have adapted to difficult environments across Asia. These were successful humans by any meaningful evolutionary measure. Homo sapiens survived, but survival is not always proof of greater worth or even greater intelligence. It can depend on timing, geography, disease exposure, population size, luck, and access to wider networks. No single explanation fully accounts for why one branch remained while others disappeared. Climate stress remains one of the strongest background forces. The Denisovan world was shaped by instability, cold pulses, shifting monsoons, changing forests, moving herds, exposed and drowned lands, and high-altitude hardship. If Denisovan populations were already divided across vast regions, climate could have weakened them unevenly. A northern population might lose access to key prey. A plateau population might face harsher seasonal shortages. A southern population might see forests and coastlines reorganized. These stresses could reduce numbers and isolate groups, making them more vulnerable to absorption or replacement when Homo sapiens arrived. Climate alone may not kill a lineage, but it can make every other danger sharper. Disease is another possible strand, difficult to prove but hard to dismiss entirely. When long-separated human populations meet, they may exchange pathogens along with genes and knowledge. Small groups can be devastated by diseases that larger or differently exposed groups survive. However, for Denisovans, the evidence for disease as a major cause is indirect at best. Ancient pathogen DNA from such contexts is rare and hard to interpret. It remains a plausible pressure rather than a demonstrated explanation. The responsible view is that disease may have contributed in some local situations, but it cannot currently be treated as the central answer. There is also the possibility of demographic fragility. Ancient DNA sometimes points towards small effective population sizes or deep population structure among archaic humans. If Denisovan groups were scattered and not always strongly connected, they may have faced the dangers that come with isolation. Small populations can lose genetic diversity. They can become vulnerable to inbreeding. They can suffer heavily from the death of a few key adults. They can lose knowledge when elders die or when children are too few to carry traditions forward. This kind of decline leaves almost no archaeological drama. A group simply becomes smaller, then rarer, then absent. This is a lesser-known but crucial part of extinction. A lineage can survive great cold and still fail because it cannot maintain enough connections between communities. It can know its landscape deeply and still vanish when neighboring groups disappear, leaving fewer mates and fewer exchanges. It can possess useful adaptations and still lose if population numbers fall below the threshold needed for long-term survival. For humans, biology and society are never separate. A small population is not only a genetic problem, it is a cultural problem. Fewer people means fewer memories, fewer specialists, fewer partnerships, fewer chances to recover from accident. Interbreeding complicates this further. If a shrinking Denisovan group meets a larger Homo sapiens network, the most likely future may not be isolation or immediate death. It may be merger. Some Denisovan individuals may join Homo sapiens groups. Some mixed descendants may be raised within modern human communities. Some Denisovan traditions may be retained for a time, then altered, then forgotten. The boundary between the two populations could become less visible with every generation. Eventually, the lineage disappears not because every person with Denisovan ancestry dies, but because there is no longer a separate Denisovan community reproducing as such. Replacement and absorption, often treated as opposites, may in reality have worked together. The archaeological record is not yet strong enough to decide where this happened, how often, or in what sequence. The strongest genetic signals in living people point towards southern or southeastern encounters with Denisovan-related groups, while the clearest fossils come from Siberia and Tibet. This geographic mismatch suggests that major parts of the story took place where preservation is poor or excavation has not yet reached the right sites. It is possible that northern Denisovan groups, plateau groups, and southern Denisovan-related groups experience different fates. Some may have vanished before Homo sapiens became common nearby. Some may have mixed extensively. Some may have persisted longer in refuges that have not yet been found. Scholars still debate these possibilities because the available evidence is powerful but uneven. Chance should not be underestimated. In human history, chance often hides behind explanations that seem cleaner afterward. A storm, a failed migration, a landslide, a disease, outbreak, a collapse in prey, animals, a blocked pass, a lost childbearing generation, a neighbouring group arriving at the wrong moment, any of these can matter when populations are small. Evolutionary history is not a moral contest in which the best always win. It is a long series of pressures filtered through accident. The Denisovans may have been capable, intelligent, adaptable humans, and still have vanished because the world changed in ways that left little margin. This makes the old idea of extinction feel too blunt. Extinction sounds final, like a candle going out. The Denisovan ending may have been more like smoke dispersing into a larger sky. Some groups may have died out, some may have been absorbed, some may have left descendants whose Denisovan ancestry was slowly diluted. Some may have contributed genes that selection preserved because they helped with altitude immunity or other environmental challenges. Their separate existence ended, but the processes behind that ending were mixed and uneven. What survives in the record suggests a disappearance without a single dramatic centre. There was no one Denisovan collapse. There were many local histories, most of them lost. The Altai record grows faint. The Tibetan clue stands isolated but powerful. The southern genetic signals point to encounters in places where bones are missing. The living genome carries fragments while the archaeological record struggles to find the bodies that once carried them fully. Between those sources lies the unsolved shape of the ending. The most grounded answer then is not replacement or absorption, but both with climate, demography and chance woven through them. Homo sapiens' expansion changed the human landscape. Denisovan populations already spread across unstable environments, faced pressures that may have reduced their numbers and connections. Interbreeding allowed part of their lineage to survive while the separate communities faded. In some regions, the process may have been peaceful and gradual. In others, it may have been harsh. The evidence does not permit a single emotional tone, and so the Denisovan disappearance remains a mystery not because nothing can be said, but because too many forces point toward the same silence. They were not simply wiped away. They were not simply preserved. They did not entirely survive, and they did not entirely vanish. Their ending sits in the uneasy space between extinction and inheritance, between loss and continuation. It is there in that blurred boundary that the human story becomes stranger than the older myths of progress ever allowed. The Denisovans are not the only ghosts in the human family tree. Their disappearance belongs to a wider vanishing, a long narrowing of a world that once held several kinds of humans at the same time. To follow that wider pattern is not to leave the Denisovan story behind, but to place it where it belongs, inside a crowded late prehistoric world in which many human experiments endured for a while, adapted to particular places, and then slipped out of separate existence. The loneliness of the modern human present is deceptive. It makes the past look as if it were always moving toward one survivor. But for much of the deep human story, survival is plural, and Homo sapiens is only one branch among others. Neanderthals are the best known of those vanished relatives, partly because their bones are far more numerous, and partly because they were discovered early in the history of paleoanthropology. They lived across Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, enduring repeated glacial and interglacial cycles. Their bodies were powerful, their limbs relatively short, their chests broad, their faces shaped by a long history in cold and variable environments. For generations, popular culture reduced them to brutes, but the evidence has steadily undone that caricature. Neanderthals made complex tools, controlled fire, hunted large animals, used pigments. In some contexts, cared for injured individuals, and occupied landscapes that demanded intelligence, cooperation, and memory. Their disappearance, like that of the Denisovans, is not explained by one clean cause. Homo sapiens expands into Europe and Western Asia. Climate shifts continue. Neanderthal populations appear to have been relatively small and fragmented in some periods. Interbreeding occurs, leaving Neanderthal ancestry in many living people today. The similarities with the Denisovan story are striking contact mixture, demographic pressure, environmental instability, and final loss of separate identity. Yet Neanderthals also differ because the fossil and archaeological record gives them much more physical presence. They have faces the modern world can reconstruct with some confidence. They have sites that can be studied in detail. They have a long visible history before silence falls. Denisovans, by contrast, remain more like an outline drawn around missing space. Far to the southeast on the island of Flores, another human relative complicates the picture in a different way. Homo floresiensis is known for its small body and small brain features that at first seemed so surprising that debate erupted over what the fossils represented. Over time, the evidence has supported the interpretation that these were not simply diseased modern humans, but a distinct human population shaped by island evolution. Islands can alter bodies in remarkable ways. Large animals may become smaller when resources are limited, while small animals may become larger in the absence of certain predators. Flores itself was home to dwarf elephants, giant rats, Komodo dragons, and a human lineage that seems to have survived in isolation long after larger-brained humans existed elsewhere. Homo floresiensis shows that the human family was not only divided by continent-wide lineages like Neanderthals and Denisovans, it also included isolated experiments in survival shaped by geography so extreme that the result feels almost impossible. These small-bodied humans made tools and endured on an island landscape where danger and scarcity would have been constant. Their exact ancestry remains debated, with scholars still discussing whether they descended from an early Homo erectus-like population or from an even earlier branch. The evidence remains incomplete, but their existence is enough to overturn any simple idea that the human past moved in one direction toward larger brains, larger bodies, and modern form. Evolution does not climb a staircase, it adapts to circumstances. In the Philippines, Homo luzonensis adds another fragment to the pattern. Known from remains found in Calao Cave on Luzon, this lineage presents a mixture of features that does not fit neatly into older expectations. The fossils are fragmentary, yet they suggest another distinct human population, living on an island in Southeast Asia during the late Pleistocene. Like Flores Luzon would have required crossing water to reach, raising difficult questions about movement, isolation, and survival. Whether Homo luzonensis was closely related to Homo floresiensis, descended from another early dispersal, or part of a more complex regional picture remains debated. But its presence reinforces the same lesson: Asia was not empty, and it was not simple. It held human diversity that is only beginning to emerge. These island lineages matter for the Denisovan mystery, because they show how much can hide in plain sight. If whole human populations survived on islands and became known only from a handful of bones, then the absence of abundant Denisovan fossils across Asia becomes less surprising. Tropical preservation is poor. Many caves remain unexcavated. Many ancient coastlines are underwater. Some fossils may already exist in collections but have not yet been genetically or proteomically identified. The Denisovans are not an isolated oddity in a well-known family tree. They are part of a broader pattern in which the human past keeps turning out to be more crowded than expected. There may also be ghost lineages not yet matched to any clear fossil. Genetic studies sometimes detect hints of ancestry in modern or ancient humans from unknown archaic populations. Such signals must be handled carefully because ancient population structure can create patterns that are difficult to interpret. Not every unusual genetic signal means a newly discovered species. Still, the possibility is real that some human relatives left little or no identifiable bone record and survive only as traces in genomes. Denisovans themselves were once such a ghost, before the finger bone gave them a name. Their discovery makes scientists more alert to the fact that absence from the fossil record does not equal absence from the past. Older human forms also haunt the background. Homo erectus, or populations traditionally placed under that broad label, spread widely across Africa and Eurasia, long before Denisovans, Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. In places such as Java, late surviving Homo erectus populations may have persisted into periods that overlap in complicated ways with other human lineages, though dates and classifications remain debated. East Asia also preserves fossils that resist easy labeling, sometimes described as archaic Homo, sometimes compared with Denisovans, sometimes left cautiously unassigned. The record is not a clean cabinet of named species. It is a shifting set of bones, dates, tools, and genetic signals, with boundaries that can be difficult to draw. This wider cast of vanished humans changes the emotional scale of the Denisovan disappearance. It was not one strange loss in an otherwise direct human story. It was part of a global thinning. Neanderthals vanished from Europe and Western Asia. Denisovans vanished as separate populations across some unknown portion of Asia. Homo floresiensis disappeared from Flores. Homo luzonensis disappeared from Luzon. Possible late Homo erectus populations disappeared from Southeast Asia. Other unnamed branches may have disappeared without ever being recognized. The world moved from many humans to one visible human species, and no ancient witness left an account of how that felt. The causes likely differed from place to place. On islands, small population size and environmental disruption may have mattered intensely. On continents, competition, interbreeding, and climate stress may have combined in different proportions. In some regions, Homo sapiens' arrival may have been decisive. In others, older lineages may already have been vulnerable. Volcanic eruptions, sea level change, habitat shifts, and local ecological collapse may have contributed in ways the evidence can barely capture. No single explanation fully accounts for this wider narrowing, because each lineage lived in a different landscape and faced a different ending. Yet a repeated pattern appears. Many vanished humans seem to have lived in relatively small or fragmented populations by the time they disappear. Many occupied challenging or changing environments. Many encountered Homo sapiens directly or indirectly. Some interbred with modern humans. Some may have been absorbed. Others may have died out without leaving descendants. The pattern is not simple replacement, and it is not peaceful blending alone. It is a long reshaping of the human world under pressure from climate geography, demography, and contact. The Denisovans stand near the centre of this pattern because they show both the depth of loss and the strange persistence of inheritance. Homo floresiensis and Homo luzonensis so far have no known genetic legacy in living people. Neanderthals and Denisovans do. They are gone yet not completely outside the present. The modern human body carries reminders that the surviving species was not untouched by the vanished ones. Every fragment of archaic ancestry is a small fossil without stone, a remnant of meetings that took place before writing, before cities, before memory in the historical sense. Seen this way, the human family tree resembles a night sky after clouds have covered most of the stars. Only one bright light remains visible to the naked eye, and it is easy to imagine it was always alone. But instruments reveal faint traces of others, some already named, some not. The Denisovans are one of those faint lights, dim in the fossil record, bright in implication. Around them are Neanderthals, island humans, archaic populations, and unknown branches, whose stories may never be fully recovered. Their disappearances do not reduce them to failures. They mark the fragility of every lineage, including the one that survived. The world of many humans ended, but it ended unevenly without a single final scene. That is why the Denisovan mystery remains so powerful within the larger human story. It reminds the present that humanity was once a plural condition, not a solitary fact. Different human bodies, different adaptations, different ways of knowing landscapes existed under the same changing sky. Then one by one, or region by region, those possibilities narrowed. The Denisovans were not the only ghosts. They were one voice in a human chorus that grew quieter over time, until only Homo sapiens remained to wonder why the others no longer answered. The survival of Homo sapiens can look inevitable only from the far side of it. From the middle of the late Pleistocene, nothing about the human world guarantees that one lineage will remain while the others fade. Neanderthals have survived cold Eurasian landscapes for immense spans of time. Denisovans have occupied parts of Asia long enough to become deeply distinct and to pass useful adaptations into later populations. Island humans endure in places where isolation reshapes bodies and habits. Each lineage represents a working solution to the problem of being human in a difficult world. The fact that only Homo sapiens is still here does not mean the others were waiting to fail. It means that survival depended on a mixture of traits, circumstances, and accidents that only later appear like destiny. One of the strongest advantages of Homo sapiens may have been connection, not intelligence in the simple sense as though the vanished lineages lacked minds, but connection across distance. Archaeological evidence from modern human sites in many regions suggests networks through which materials, ideas, ornaments, and perhaps mates moved over broad areas. Such networks matter because they make small groups less alone. If one band loses people, another may supply marriage partners. If one region suffers scarcity, knowledge of alternative routes may spread. If one technique proves useful, it can travel beyond the group that invented it. In a world of unstable climate-wide social connection, can turn local failure into temporary hardship rather than extinction. This does not mean every Homo sapiens group was highly connected, or every archaic group was isolated. The evidence remains incomplete, and the differences probably varied by region and period. Neanderthals also moved materials and maintained traditions. Denisovans must have had social learning and local knowledge, or they could not have survived the environments they occupied. Still, if modern human populations on average maintained larger or more flexible networks during crucial phases of expansion, that may have created a demographic resilience older lineages lacked. Survival may have belonged less to the cleverest individual and more to the widest web of relationships. Population size is another quiet force. A larger population does not need to be enormous to gain an advantage. In Ice Age terms, even modest differences matter. More people mean more births, more chances for innovation, more memory stored across individuals, and more ability to recover after loss. A small Denisovan or Neanderthal group might know its territory perfectly, but a run of harsh winters could still damage it beyond repair. A broader Homo sapiens network could lose one group and continue through others. Over thousands of years, this difference compounds. The vanished lineages may not have lost in one confrontation. They may have lost through arithmetic, the slow power of more connected descendants surviving more often. Flexibility also matters, though it should not be exaggerated into a magical trait. Homo sapiens eventually live across deserts, coasts, forests, grasslands, tundra, margins, islands and highlands. They develop many ways of making tools, building shelters, hunting, gathering, storing knowledge, signaling identity and organizing social life. Cultural flexibility allows a population to change behavior faster than biological evolution alone would allow. When climates shift, culture can move quickly. A new tool, a new route, a new food source, a new alliance, a new seasonal pattern. This may have given Homo sapiens an advantage in a world where the ground rules kept changing, yet Denisovans and Neanderthals were also flexible. Neanderthals endured repeated climatic swings and occupied varied environments. Denisovans may have lived from Siberian cold to Tibetan heights, and perhaps southern forests or lowlands. Their disappearance cannot be explained by saying they were rigid while Homo sapiens were adaptable. The difference may have been one of degree, timing and scale. Modern humans may have combined adaptability with wider networks and larger populations at the very moment climate instability and geographic opportunity made those traits especially powerful. In deep history, the same trait can matter little in one era and decide survival in another. Technology may have contributed in similar fashion. Modern humans are associated in many regions with diverse and sometimes rapidly changing toolkits, including blades, bone tools, projectile technologies, ornaments, pigments, and complex use of organic materials. Some of these tools may have improved hunting efficiency, clothing production, shelter storage, or symbolic communication. But the record is uneven, and not every tool can be assigned neatly to one lineage. Neanderthals made sophisticated tools. Denisovan material culture remains difficult to isolate. Scholars still debate how much technological difference drove the survival of Homo sapiens. It is safer to see technology as one part of a larger system, powerful when joined to social learning, mobility and exchange. Symbolic behavior may have strengthened that system. Ornaments, pigments, body decoration and shared styles can do more than express beauty. They can mark group identity, signal alliances, define belonging, and help people recognize social ties beyond immediate kin. In landscapes where groups need distant partners, symbols may become practical tools of survival. A bead, a painted object, or a repeated decorative pattern can carry meaning across encounters. The evidence for symbolic life among archaic humans is increasingly complex, and it would be wrong to deny them inner worlds. But Homo sapiens appear to have developed especially widespread and varied symbolic systems in many later contexts, and those systems may have helped maintain the social networks that supported expansion. Language sits behind all of this, though it is difficult to study directly. Homo sapiens clearly possess complex language today, and language allows detailed teaching, planning, storytelling, memory, and cooperation across time. Neanderthals and Denisovans may also have had significant vocal and cognitive capacities. The evidence does not permit easy dismissal. The real difference, if there was one, may not have been the simple presence or absence of language, but how communication, group size, symbolism, and social structure work together. No fossil preserves a conversation. No genome gives a full grammar. What survives in the record suggests that communication was central to all human lineages, but the specific forms are lost. Chance remains woven through every advantage. Homo sapiens may have expanded at a moment when climate corridors opened. They may have entered regions where older populations were already weakened. They may have carried immunity to some diseases and vulnerability to others with outcomes depending on local contact. They may have benefited from coastal routes now drowned from prey distributions that favored mobility, or from demographic luck after earlier failed dispersals. A lineage survives, not because every group succeeds, but because enough groups do. The path to the present likely includes many Homo sapiens failures that left little trace, just as Denisovan failures did. This is a lesser-known corrective to the triumphal story. Homo sapiens did not simply win everywhere from the start. Some early expansions beyond Africa may have left little or no lasting ancestry. Some groups vanished, some were absorbed, some reached limits and retreated. The surviving branch of modern humanity is itself the product of bottlenecks, migrations, and chance events. The difference is that enough Homo sapiens populations remained connected, numerous, and flexible enough to continue when others did not. Survival was not a crown placed on a superior species, it was a process fragile at every stage. The Denisovan contribution to modern humans makes this even clearer. Homo sapiens survived partly by carrying pieces of other humans. The high-altitude adaptation associated with Denisovan ancestry in Tibetans is one example, but the broader point is deeper. The surviving species was not sealed off from the vanished ones. It inherited from them. It was changed by them. In some environments, those inherited fragments may have improved survival. The line that survived was in small but meaningful ways a line shaped by those that disappeared. So why did some humans survive while others vanished? The most grounded answer is not a single trait, but a convergence. Homo sapiens likely benefited from larger and more connected populations, flexible culture, adaptable technology, symbolic systems, mobility, and repeated opportunities to expand through changing landscapes. Denisovans and other lineages faced climate instability, fragmentation, small population risks, and contact with expanding modern humans. Sometimes they mixed, sometimes they were replaced, sometimes they may have disappeared before contact mattered. No single explanation fully accounts for this because survival is not one contest fought in one place. The human present is therefore both a survival and a remainder. It carries the evidence of endurance but also the absence of other possibilities. Homo sapiens remain yet not untouched. The vanished lineages are gone yet not without consequence. The Denisovans especially remind the present that survival did not belong to a pure and lonely branch. It belonged to a branch that moved, connected, adapted, absorbed, and was altered by encounters with others. The last visible human species is also a living archive of the many human world that came before it, and that makes the disappearance of the Denisovans not a story of simple failure, but part of the strange inheritance that allowed one lineage to continue. The Denisovan lineage still breathes, though not as a separate people standing under its own name. It breathes in a quieter form broken into fragments and carried through the bodies of living humans. This is the strange afterlife of a vanished lineage. No settlements remain that can be confidently called Denisovan cities, because there were no cities in their world. No inscription preserves their memory because writing lay far in the future. No descendant community remembers them through story as Denisovans, because the name itself belongs to modern science. Yet parts of their inheritance continue to move through the present. They survive not as a tribe, not as a language, not as a visible face, but as traces in genomes shaped by ancient meetings and carried forward without conscious memory. This kind of survival is difficult to imagine because it does not resemble the legacies people usually look for in history. Civilizations leave walls, roads, pottery, carved stones, shipwrecks, fields, and ruins. Even when their names are forgotten, their material presence can remain heavy in the landscape. The Denisovans leave almost the opposite. Their known physical remains are rare, their tools uncertain, their appearance still partly hidden, and their geography only partly reconstructed. Their strongest legacy is inward rather than outward. It lies in inherited DNA segments, shortened by recombination over thousands of generations, mixed into the ancestry of populations that continued after them. Their memorial is not a monument, it is a biological echo. The most famous of these echoes is tied to the Tibetan plateau. In a place where the air is thin and each breath carries less oxygen, modern Tibetan populations often possess a version of the EPAS1 gene that helps regulate the body's response to high altitude. Genetic research indicates that this variant entered Homo sapiens through Denisovan ancestry. It is an astonishing chain of survival. A Denisovan or Denisovan-related population lives long enough in high altitude or related environments to carry a useful adaptation. Members of that population interbreed with ancestors of modern humans. The Denisovan lineage later disappears as a separate population, yet the variant remains and becomes important in a different human future, helping people live where lowland bodies often struggle. That inheritance does not mean the entire story of Tibetan life comes from Denisovans. Human adaptation to high altitude is complex, shaped by culture, diet, settlement, history, physiology, and many genes, not one ancient gift alone. But the Denisovan contribution is a clear example of something profound. Vanished humans helped living humans inhabit the planet. They were not evolutionary dead ends in the careless sense. Their line ended separately, but part of what they carried proved valuable beyond them. What survives in the record suggests that contact with archaic humans sometimes gave Homo sapiens access to adaptations shaped by long local experience. Modern humans entering new regions did not always adapt from nothing. Sometimes they inherited solutions from those already there. Other Denisovan genetic fragments may have influenced immune responses or environmental adaptation, though these connections are often more complex and less dramatic than the high-altitude case. Ancient humans living in different regions would have encountered different pathogens, climates, diets, and ecological pressures. Over long time spans, natural selection could favor variants useful in those places. When Homo sapiens interbred with Denisovan-related groups, some of those variants entered modern human populations. Many fragments may have been neutral, some may have been harmful and reduced over time, a few may have been beneficial enough to persist. The evidence remains incomplete, but the pattern reveals ancient contact as more than a genealogical curiosity. It may have shaped survival in real environments. In Oceania, especially among indigenous peoples of New Guinea and nearby regions, Denisovan ancestry reaches some of its highest known levels. This genetic signal points back to ancient encounters somewhere along the routes taken by the ancestors of these populations as they moved through Asia and towards Sahul. The geography remains debated and no single site has yet provided a complete explanation. The contact may have occurred on mainland Southeast Asian landscapes in island regions or on lands now swallowed by the sea. It may even reflect more than one encounter with distinct Denisovan-related populations. But the result is clear enough: people living today carry ancestry from a lineage whose separate body vanished tens of thousands of years ago. This does not make living populations relics of Denisovans, a phrase that would be misleading and wrong. Modern people are not museum pieces or simple containers of ancient fragments. They are fully modern humans with their own histories, cultures, languages, and identities. Denisovan ancestry is one part of a much broader inheritance, just as Neanderthal ancestry is one part of the ancestry of many non-African populations. The significance lies not in dividing people into archaic fractions, but in recognizing that all living human history is braided. The present species was shaped by movement and mixture. Its genome carries evidence of encounters that happened before memory, before agriculture, before the first written names. This braided inheritance also changes the meaning of disappearance. If Denisovans had vanished without interbreeding, their story would still matter as one lost human possibility. but because they left genetic traces, their disappearance is less like a clean extinction and more like a transformation. The separate branch disappears, but some of its material is grafted into the branch that continues. The tree metaphor becomes imperfect here because real human evolution looks less like branches that never touch, and more like streams that split and rejoin. Denisovans, Neanderthals, Homo sapiens, and perhaps other unknown groups exchanged ancestry at different times. The final visible species is the result of survival, but also of absorption. A lesser-known consequence of this is that some Denisovan fragments may have travelled far from the places where they first entered Homo sapiens. Once a genetic segment becomes part of a modern human population, it can move through later migrations, expansions, and demographic changes. A fragment inherited in one region may persist, decline, or spread depending on the history of the people who carry it. Over time, the original encounter becomes almost impossible to reconstruct from the fragment alone. The gene travels without its landscape. It moves through marriages, migrations, population splits, and chance. By the present, it may remain as evidence of contact, but not as a full map of where that contact took place. The Denisovan legacy is also uneven because inheritance is uneven. Some people carry more Denisovan ancestry than others. Some carry none that is detectable. Some inherited fragments may be shared widely, while others are rare. Natural selection, chance population size, and ancient geography all shape this pattern. This unevenness is not a hierarchy of humanity. It is a map of ancient encounters. It shows that different ancestors moved through different places and met different human groups. The genome becomes a record of paths taken and paths not taken, of contacts made and contacts missed. The emotional force of the story comes from the fact that Denisovan genes outlast Denisovan memory. A person may carry a fragment from that vanished lineage without knowing it, without feeling anything unusual, without any visible sign that deep time is present in the body. The inheritance is silent. It does not announce itself. It does not preserve a Denisovan language or face. Yet it links the living to human beings who once endured cold caves, high plateaus, forests, and roots now drowned beneath the sea. It connects modern breath immunity or ancestry to people whose own world has disappeared almost beyond recognition. There is humility in that. The human past is not owned entirely by the species that survived. It is shared with those who did not, and the survivors are partly made of them. Denisovans were not a failed experiment sealed away in extinction. They were relatives whose lives intersected with the ancestors of living people. Their separateness ended, but their influence continued in ways no Denisovan could have imagined. The same may be true of other ghost lineages still hidden in genetic data, their names not yet known, their fossils not yet found. The lineage that disappeared without warning then did not disappear without consequence. It helped reshape the map of human origins. It revealed that Asia's deep past was filled with unknown human diversity. It forced scientists to rethink how lineages are discovered, how extinction works, and how much of the past can survive invisibly. Most of all, it blurred the boundary between the vanished and the living. The Denisovans are gone from the world of separate human communities, but they remain as fragments inside the world that followed. They breathe where their genes still function. They persist where their ancestry is carried. They endure not as a people remembered, but as a presence inherited. And that may be the most haunting form of survival. Not a ruin against the horizon, not a name carved into stone, not a myth passed down beside a fire, but a hidden trace within the living body older than history and almost lost before it was understood. The Denisovan story begins with a small bone in a cave, but it does not end there. It continues in the thin air of the plateau in island ancestries of the far Pacific, in the quiet mathematics of genomes, and in the realization that the last human species is not alone inside itself. The vanished lineage still breathes softly through those who remain. What disappearance really means becomes harder to answer the closer the Denisovans are examined. At first the word seems simple. A lineage exists, then it no longer exists. Bones appear in ancient layers, then the layers fall silent. Genes enter other populations, then the separate people who carried them fade beyond recognition. But the Denisovan story refuses that clean shape. Their disappearance is not a single line drawn across time. It is a blurred edge, a place where extinction, interbreeding memory and scientific uncertainty overlap. They are gone, yet not wholly gone. They vanished, yet their inheritance remains. They cease to exist as a separate human lineage, yet small pieces of their biology still participate in the lives of people today. This is why the mystery feels different from the collapse of a city or the fall of a kingdom. A civilization can disappear from political power, while its people continue, its language changes, its customs are absorbed, and its ruins remain visible for centuries. The Denisovans belong to an older and quieter scale of loss. They left no known cities, no written records, no named rulers, no carved lament, no final battlefield remembered by descendants. Their world existed before those forms of history. Their disappearance happened in landscapes where memory was carried by living people, not by texts. When those people vanished as a separate community, most of their memory vanished with them. Yet they were not erased from biology. That contradiction is the center of the story. The fossil record gives them only a few hard fragments, while the genetic record spreads them across a much larger human map. A child's finger bone in Siberia, teeth in a cave, a jaw on the Tibetan plateau. DNA in sediments and Denisovan ancestry and living populations together reveal a lineage that was once real, widespread and deeply entangled with others. What survives in the record suggests not a minor curiosity but a major branch of the late human world, known only because modern science learned to read evidence too small for older archaeology to see. Their ending may have differed from place to place. In one region, Denisovan groups may have declined under climate pressure, as animals moved, forests shifted, or cold tightened its grip on the land. In another, they may have met Homo sapiens and gradually blended into expanding populations. Somewhere else, small communities may have become isolated until births, deaths, disease, and chance slowly reduced them beyond recovery. On the Tibetan plateau, their adaptations may have outlived them. In southern Asia or along drowned routes toward Oceania, their descendants may have become part of modern human ancestry. No single explanation fully accounts for this because there may never have been a single Denisovan ending. The word extinction then is accurate but incomplete. It is accurate because there are no Denisovans alive today as a separate population. Their independent evolutionary path has ended. Their bodies, communities, traditions, and perhaps languages are gone. But it is incomplete because extinction did not remove every trace. Some Denisovan DNA survived through mixture. Some of that DNA may have helped modern humans adapt to demanding environments. Their lineage disappeared from the visible world while remaining in pieces within the lineage that continued. That is not survival in the ordinary sense. It is not continuity of a people. But it is also not absolute erasure. This blurred ending forces a wider reconsideration of the human story. Modern humanity is often imagined as a solitary species looking backward at extinct relatives from a safe distance. The Denisovans make that distance smaller. They show that the vanished humans were not only predecessors or competitors, they were also ancestors in fragments. The present human body can carry traces of meetings that happened tens of thousands of years ago in landscapes now changed beyond recognition. Some of those meetings may have been brief, some may have been uneasy, some may have created families. The evidence remains incomplete, but the genetic inheritance proves that the old human world was not divided by walls as firm as later imagination once believed. Their story also reveals how much depends on preservation. If the finger bone from Denisova Cave had not survived, if its DNA had been too degraded, if no one had sampled it, with the right methods, the lineage might have remained hidden much longer. Its genetic traces in living people may have seemed mysterious, perhaps attributed to some unknown archaic population without a name. A whole human branch came into view because a tiny fragment of a child's body endured in the right conditions. This is a humbling thought. The known past is not the same as the actual past. It is the past that happened to leave evidence strong enough to be found. There may have been other lineages like this, humans who lived, adapted, met others, and disappeared with even fewer traces. Some may still be hidden in ancient DNA. Some may be represented by fossils that have not yet been understood. Some may be gone forever, erased by heat, water, acid soil, rising seas, and ordinary time. The Denisovans are therefore both a discovery and a warning. They show how suddenly the human family tree can widen when new evidence appears. They also show how much of that tree may still be missing. In the end, the vanished lineage did not disappear without warning to itself. No population lives as an archaeological category. Denisovans would have known hardship movement, hunger, kinship, and changing landscapes as immediate realities, not as signs of extinction. Their world may have narrowed gradually. Their children may have been born into mixed communities. Their last separate groups may not have understood themselves as the last of anything. The warning appears only to those looking backward. Seeing the record thin, the fossils stop, the genes scatter, and the separate identity dissolve. What disappearance really means in their case is the loss of separateness. The Denisovans did not leave a clean absence. They left a broken presence. They are in the cave, and not in the cave in the genome, and not in memory extinct and yet inherited. Their story ends not with a final shout, but with a fading boundary, where one kind of human becomes impossible to distinguish from the wider stream that carries pieces of it onward. Deep time rarely gives simple endings. It gives fragments and asks the living to understand that even disappearance can have descendants. Word count 1067. The cave grows quiet again. Outside it, the mountains remain older than every name given to them, holding snow, windstone, and the slow patience of the earth. The people who once moved through those valleys are gone from sight. Their fires have cooled. Their paths have been covered by soil, forest, ice, and water. Their hands no longer shape stone in the half-light of shelter. Their children no longer learn the roots of animals beneath the cold sky. Whatever they knew, whatever they feared, whatever they remembered at the edge of sleep has passed beyond recovery. And yet the silence is not empty. A small bone remains, a tooth remains, a jaw from high country remains, a trace of DNA lingers in cave earth. A fragment of inheritance travels quietly through living bodies. These are not enough to rebuild a whole world, but they are enough to show that the world was there. They are enough to widen the idea of humanity and soften the certainty of the present. The last surviving human species stands not at the top of a ladder, but at the end of many crossings carrying the marks of relatives who no longer walk beside it. Time has a way of making disappearance look peaceful from far away. In life it may have been hunger, cold movement, contact, loss, birth, adaptation, and change. In the record it becomes a thinning line. The Denisovans fade into fragments, and the fragments fade into questions. Still, something of them remains not as a monument but as a reminder that existence does not always need stone walls or written words to leave a mark. Long before cities, before kings, before maps, before history learned to name itself, there were other humans under the same sky. Some endured for a while in caves and valleys, on plateaus and hidden routes in forests and lands now drowned beneath the sea. Then their separate worlds ended. The wind moved over the entrances of caves. The seasons continued. Rivers carried silt through valleys where no one remembered who had once passed. The Denisovans leave the story gently, not because their ending was gentle, but because distance has made it quiet. Their final image is not a ruin, not a grave, not a last face looking back from the dark. It is a breath taken in thin mountain air, a child's bone resting in earth, hidden inheritance moving forward through time. The lineage disappeared, but the human story kept part of it alive softly and visibly beneath the surface of the living world.